Hey guys, tonight we're not just going to tell a story, we're going to pull on a thread that stretches back thousands of years into a world where gods walked the earth, monsters lurked in the shadows, and human ingenuity was often the only thing standing between a hero and oblivion. Imagine, if you will, the salt spray on your face, the creak of timber underfoot, the distant, mournful cry of a sea beast you really, really hope isn't heading your way. You feel the sun baking your skin, but beneath that, a cold dread seeps into your bones, because UVA just realized something. You're really not in your cozy bed anymore. You're adrift on the wine-dark sea, a tiny speck in an unforgiving expanse, and frankly, you probably won't survive this trip. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And, hey, where are you guys tuning in from tonight? Drop your location and local time in the comments. It's always wild to see how far these sleepy stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our story, or rather, your story, tonight begins not with a bang, but with a clever man, a man of many turns, as the ancient Greeks liked to call him, a polytropos, someone whose mind twisted and turned, always finding a way. This is the myth of Odysseus, king of Ithaca, a rugged island outpost tucked away in the Ionian Sea, just off the western coast of Greece. Now, when you picture a king, you might imagine a hulking warrior, a fierce general, or a stern, bearded elder. But Odysseus, he was different. Leaner, perhaps, more wiry. His strength wasn't just in his arm, but in his quick, silver tongue, and a mind that could outwit gods and mortals alike. Think of him as the original escape artist, the ultimate problem solver. He was the guy you wanted on your team when things went sideways, but maybe not the guy you trust with your last slice of pizza. Just kidding. Mostly, you find yourself in Ithaca, a place of steep cliffs, rocky beaches, and a hardy, independent people. The air smells of wild thyme and the sea, carried on a gentle breeze that rustles through olive groves. You see Penelope, his devoted wife, renowned for her beauty and her unwavering loyalty. A rare and precious thing in an age where royal marriages were more about alliances than affection. And then there's young Telemachus, their son, still just a boy, growing up under the watchful eyes of nannies and old servants. Odysseus loved his family, his home, his quiet life. He was content. And that, my sleepy friend, is precisely why the gods, in their infinite wisdom and often cruel amusement, decided to mess with him. The rumblings began subtly. Whispers carried on the wind from the east. Paris, a prince of Troy, had committed the ultimate social faux pas. He'd abducted Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world, from her husband Menelaus, the king of Sparta. Now, in our modern world, we might call this a custody dispute, maybe a scandal. But back then, it was an insult to the entire Greek world, an affront that demanded blood. And so, the call went out. Agamemnon, Menelaus's brother, and the powerful king of Mycenae, began to gather the mightiest heroes of Greece. Achilles, the greatest warrior. Ajax, a towering brute. Diomedes, a brave strategist. And yes, our clever Odysseus. But Odysseus, remember, was a homebody. He was smart enough to know that a war fought over one woman, however beautiful, was likely to be long, brutal, and utterly miserable. He'd seen enough prophecies to know these things rarely ended well for anyone. So, when Agamemnon's envoys arrived at Ithaca, you watch as Odysseus tries to feign madness. He hitches an ox and a donkey to a plow, a bizarre combination, and sows his fields with salt, a futile, destructive act, claiming he'd lost his mind. You can almost hear the soft chuckle of the gods as they watch this pathetic display. One of Agamemnon's men, a shrewd chieftain named Palamedes, wasn't fooled. He knew Odysseus was sharp as a tack, so what did he do? He placed young Telemachus, just a babe, directly in the path of the plow. You hold your breath, your heart in your throat, as the sharp plowshare draws closer and closer to the innocent child. Odysseus, for all his cunning, was a father first. Feared the plow, stopping his act instantly. The ruse was over. He was caught. And so, with a heavy sigh, he reluctantly agreed to join the Greek expedition against Troy. Historians still argue whether Palamedes' trick was a stroke of genius or an utterly ruthless gamble. Either way, it worked. You find yourself now among thousands of ships gathering at Aulis, a port shrouded in a thick, unmoving fog. The winds, normally a reliable ally for sailors, have vanished. Day after day, the ships sit becalmed, their sails limp, the mood among the warriors growing uglier by the hour. The seer Calchas, a rather dramatic fellow, eventually reveals the awful truth. The goddess Artemis is angry. Agamemnon, in a moment of hubris, had boasted about his hunting prowess, comparing himself to the goddess. Her price for fair winds, the sacrifice of his own daughter, Iphigenia. Now, imagine the scene. You're standing there, part of this massive, restless army. The air is thick with tension, the whispers of mutiny growing louder. Agamemnon is distraught, torn between his duty to the army and his love for his child. Do you think steps forward to handle this utterly ghastly PR nightmare? Odysseus. Of course, he's the one who convinces Agamemnon that this gruesome act is necessary. That glory and the success of the expedition depend on it. He, along with Diomedes, even travels to Mycenae to fetch Iphigenia, luring her with a false promise of marriage to Achilles. You can almost feel the chill in the air as they lead her to the altar, an innocent pawn in a divine game. Whether she was truly sacrificed or spirited away by Artemis herself, replaced by a deer at the last moment, is another one of those delightful scholarly debates. The outcome, for the winds at least, was the same. They blew, and so the vast fleet, over 1,000 ships, set sail across the Aegean Sea. The mighty Greek army finally heading towards the glittering walls of Troy. You are among them, silent observer, as this armada, the greatest military expedition of its time, slices through the waves. The journey itself was not without incident, but eventually you see the massive fortifications of Troy rising from the plains, an imposing sight. The siege, as you probably know, wasn't a quick affair. It dragged on for 10 long, grinding years. 10 years of pitched battles, of heroes falling, of endless skirmishes and strategic stalemates. Throughout this endless war, you see Odysseus proving his worth, not just as a fighter, though he was certainly brave, but as the Greeks' most valuable strategist and diplomat. He was the one sent on dangerous scouting missions, the one who could talk his way out of trouble, or into it, depending on what the situation called for. Remember Philoctetes? It's the guy with the magical bow of Heracles, but also a nasty, festering snakebite on his foot that made him unbearable to be around. The Greeks abandoned him on an island, but a prophecy foretold that Troy could only fall with Heracles' bow. So, who did they send to retrieve the embittered, limping hero and his smelly foot? You guessed it, Odysseus. He used his silver tongue, his persuasive charm, perhaps a dash of deception, and convinced Philoctetes to rejoin the war. He can almost smell the wound, even from here. But the bow, was a game changer. You watch him, time and again, in the thick of things. He's part of the famous embassy to Achilles, when the great warrior sulks in his tent after Agamemnon wrongs him. Odysseus tries to persuade Achilles to return to battle, offering lavish gifts and apologies. While ultimately unsuccessful at first, it shows his critical role as a negotiator. He's often the voice of reason, or at least the voice of cunning pragmatism. In the Greek War Council, often clashing with the more hot-headed warriors like Ajax. One night, under the cloak of darkness, accompany him and Diomedes on a daring raid into the heart of Troy. Their mission, to steal the Palladium, a sacred statue of the goddess Pallas Athena, believed to protect the city. Without it, the Trojans' morale and perhaps their divine favor would crumble. You creep through the moonlit streets, shadows clinging to every corner, your heart pounding a rhythm against your ribs. The two heroes, working in perfect synchronicity, manage to infiltrate the citadel, snatch the palladium, and slip away undetected. Silent operation that shows Odysseus' daring in his ability to execute complex plans under immense pressure. Imagine trying to sneak a full-size statue out of a heavily guarded city. It's no small feat. But of course, his most famous, most audacious plan, the one that cemented his legacy as the trickster supreme, was the Trojan horse. 10 long years. 10 years of siege, of countless deaths, of banging their heads against those impenetrable walls. The Greeks were exhausted, morale was at rock bottom, and victory seemed utterly impossible. That's when Odysseus, in a flash of divine inspiration, or perhaps just pure, distilled cunning, proposed an idea so outlandish, so brilliant, so utterly Odyssean, that it could only work. You're there, watching as the idea spreads through the weary Greek camp. Build a colossal wooden horse, make it so massive that the Trojans would think it's a religious offering. Hide a crack team of the best Greek warriors inside its hollow belly. Then pretend to sail away, leaving the horse behind on the beach. The Trojans, thinking they've won, will bring the horse into their city as a war trophy. And then, under the cover of night, the hidden warriors will emerge, open the gates, and allow the rest of the Greek army, who have secretly returned, to pour in and sack the city. It's a gamble of epic proportions, relying on a level of deception that would make a con artist blush. The Greek craftsmen, led by the master carpenter Odysseus, get to work. You see the enormous timbers being felled, the planks being shaped, the smell of fresh-cut wood filling the air. Day by day, the monstrous effigy takes shape, its hollow belly growing larger, its wooden head staring blankly out towards the city. It must have been truly massive, perhaps 2 stories high, an awe-inspiring sight. Then comes the critical part, selecting the men. Only the bravest, the strongest, the most disciplined, and crucially, the quietest. Odysseus, naturally, is among them, leading the charge, i.e., watch as they silently clamber into the horse, one by one, their armor muffled, their weapons sheathed. You can feel the claustrophobia, the tension, as they squeeze into the dark, echoing space, not knowing if this brilliant plan will lead to glory or a gruesome death by immolation. Some accounts suggest there were 50 men inside. Others, like Virgil, mention fewer, perhaps 30. It's a debate that adds to the mystique, doesn't it? Imagine being crammed in there for hours, perhaps days, in total silence. You'd need nerves of steel, and probably a very good bladder. The next morning, the Greeks set fire to their camp, leaving a single figure behind, Sinon, a master manipulator and Odysseus' chosen accomplice. He's designed to be captured by the Trojans, to spin a tale so convincing, so heartbreakingly believable, that they would swallow it whole. You watch from afar as the Trojan scouts find Sinon, seemingly abandoned and distraught. He weeps, he begs for mercy, and then he tells his fabricated story. The Greeks, claims, abandoned the siege, but left the horse as an offering to Athena to atone for stealing the palladium. He warns them that bringing it inside their walls would incur divine wrath, thus making the Trojans want to bring it in as a protective talisman. He even claims that Odysseus, in his typical shrewdness, hated him and tried to sacrifice him, making his story even more plausible. The Trojans, ecstatic at the apparent end of the decade-long war, fall for it completely, despite the warnings of their prophetess Cassandra, who could see the future but was cursed never to be believed, and the priest, Laocoon, who famously cried, "Beware of Greeks bearing gifts," and hurled a spear at the horse. They decide to bring the colossal wooden beast into their city. You see them cheer, their faces alight with joy, as they dismantled part of their own wall, a wall that had withstood 10 years of siege to drag the horse inside. It's an act of collective delusion, of celebratory folly, Imagine the effort, the ropes, the rollers, the sheer manpower needed to pull something of that size through a narrow opening. The air is thick with dust and triumphant shouts. Night falls. The city of Troy, for the first time in 10 years, is celebrating. Feasts are laid out, wine flows freely, and the sounds of revelry echo through the streets. You are hidden, watching as the last of the celebratory fires begin to dwindle. The Trojans, exhausted by their jubilation, eventually fall into a deep, unsuspecting sleep. Then, from the belly of the horse, a hatch creaks open. Odysseus, ever the leader, slowly, cautiously, emerges. He's followed by the other Greek warriors, their faces grim and determined. The silence is profound, broken only by the soft scrape of their sandals on the stone and the distant snores of the unsuspecting Trojans. They stealthily make their way to the Scion gates and open them, signaling to the returning Greek fleet that had been hiding just out of sight behind the island of Tenedos. And then, the deluge. The Greek army pours into the sleeping city. The celebratory sounds are replaced by the screams of the dying, the clash of steel, the roar of invading soldiers. Fires erupt, lighting up the night sky with a horrifying glow. You witness the brutal sack of Troy. Temples are desecrated, women are enslaved, children are slain. It is a terrifying, merciless night, the culmination of a decade of simmering hatred and the ultimate victory of cunning over strength. Odysseus, for all his strategic genius, is also part of this brutality, a product of his time, a warrior who knew how to finish a war. The city burns. The once proud walls crumble. You see the sheer devastation, the raw horror of it all. It's a victory, yes, but one steeped in blood and destruction. The Greeks have won, but their hubris, their excessive celebration, their disrespect for the gods and sacred places in the aftermath of their triumph would soon earn them the wrath of the very deities who had seemingly favored them. Athena, once their ally, would turn against them. Poseidon, the earthshaker, would remember the destruction of his city and the desecration of his temples, and he would begin to plot. As dawn breaks over the smoldering ruins of Troy, you feel the exhaustion, the lingering dread in the air. The war is over. The Greek heroes, laden with spoils, are ready to go home. They gather their ships, repair what they can, and look towards the west, towards the familiar waters that lead to their homes, their families, their quiet lives. They don't know it yet, but for many, the true trials are only just beginning. For Odysseus, in particular, the easy part, the war, is finished. The real journey, a 10-year Odyssey that will become legend, is about to begin. You sense the shift in the wind, a subtle change, as if the very air knows that this departure isn't merely the end of a war, but the start of an epic struggle for survival against the whims of vengeful gods and monstrous forces. Their ships, victorious but weary, push off from the shore, leaving the burning husk of Troy behind. The smell of smoke still hangs heavy in the air, mixing with the scent of the sea. They sail north, then west, towards the islands of the Aegean. Their first stop, they hope, is the land of the Chicanas, in the city of Ismaris, just off the coast of Thrace. They arrive, a conquering army, and you watch as they fall upon the city, sacking it, just as they did Troy. It's a habit, a reflex from a decade of war, a plunder and pillage routine that has become second nature. Odysseus tries to warn them, tries to get them to leave quickly with their spoils, knowing that lingering after a raid is dangerous. But his men, drunk on victory and wine, refuse to listen. They feast, they celebrate, they sleep it off, oblivious to the gathering storm. And gather it does. The Chicanas, enraged, call upon their neighbors, who are fierce inland warriors, skilled in fighting from horseback. Ye, see the dust rising on the horizon, hear the thunder of hooves, and soon the Greeks are caught completely off guard. It's a brutal counterattack. Odysseus and his men, caught between the sea and a vengeful enemy, fight desperately. 6 men from each of his 12 ships are lost in the ensuing melee. A stark, painful reminder that even after victory, the world remains dangerous. It's a bloody lesson, a taste of the suffering to come, just days into their long-anticipated journey home. With heavy hearts and fewer comrades, they finally manage to break free, hoisting their sails and fleeing the bloody shores of Ismarus. They thought the war was over. Little did they know, this was just the prologue to a decade of divine wrath and impossible challenges. They put distance between themselves and that cursed coastline, the scent of blood and defeat still clinging to the salt spray. The wind, which had felt like a fickle ally moments before, now tasted like a bitter prophecy. You're exhausted, bone-weary, your muscles screaming from the desperate fight, but there's no rest to be found. Just the endless rocking of the ship, the mournful creak of the timbers, and the gnawing ache of loss. 6 men per ship, gone. Just like that, a brutal reminder that home was still a very, very long way off, and the universe, or perhaps the gods themselves, were not done testing them. And test them, the gods certainly did. You feel it in the air, a subtle shift, a prickle on your skin that has nothing to do with the sea spray. The very next morning, as they round Cape Maleta, the southernmost tip of the Peloponnese, a sudden, furious storm descends upon them. Poseidon, the earthshaker, god of the sea, lord of horses, and the patron deity of Troy, remember how his temples were desecrated? Was not pleased, not in the slightest. He's the kind of guy who holds a grudge like a kraken holds a ship tightly, and with destructive intent. The sky turns an ominous, bruised purple, then black. Waves, the size of houses, rise up, crashing down on the small ships with a terrifying roar. You're tossed about like a toy, clinging desperately to the rigging, feeling the deck vanish beneath your feet, only to slam back down with bone-jarring force. The wind howls, a banshee scream ripping through the sails, shredding them to ribbons. Rain lashes down, cold and relentless, blinding you, mixing with the salt water that floods the deck. The men, veterans of countless battles, are pale with fear, bailing frantically, their shouts swallowed by the gale. Odysseus, ever the pragmatist, struggles to keep his bearings, shouting orders that are barely heard over the din, trying to steer his battered fleet through the chaos. It's a battle against nature, a force far more indifferent and terrifying than any human army. This wasn't just bad weather. This was divine retribution. You can almost hear Poseidon cackling from his underwater palace, sending his watery minions to punish these impudent mortals. For 9 days and 9 nights, they are utterly lost, driven by the merciless winds and currents. The storm batters them relentlessly, pushing them far, far off course, away from the familiar routes home. They lose sight of land, of each other, their formations scattered like dandelion seeds in a hurricane. When the sun, finally, mercifully, breaks through the bruised clouds on the 10th day, the world seems alien. The familiar landmarks of the Greek coast are gone. They are adrift in uncharted waters, heading west into the great unknown. Finally, exhausted, dehydrated, and thoroughly miserable, the remnants of Odysseus' fleet make landfall. You stumble onto a shore that feels different. The air is warm, heavy with a strange, sweet scent, almost sickly cloying. The land is lush, green, teeming with exotic flowers you've never seen before. Their petals, vibrant in shades of purple, crimson, and gold. This isn't the rocky, time-scented landscape of Ithaca. This is somewhere else entirely. This is the land of the lotus eaters. Odysseus, cautious as ever after the Chacones debacle, orders a small landing party ashore. You watch as a few chosen men, their faces still etched with the fear of the storm, reluctantly disembark, led by a reliable officer. Their mission, to scout the area, find out who lives here, and see if there's any fresh water or provisions. Approach with caution, Odysseus warns, his voice rough with fatigue. We've had enough surprises for one journey. You wait by the ships, the gentle lapping of the waves on the shore, a soothing counterpoint to the still ringing memory of the storm. The sun beats down, warm and comforting, and that strange, sweet scent seems to seep into your very bones, lulling you, making you feel incredibly relaxed, a little too relaxed, perhaps. An hour passes, then another. The landing party doesn't return. A prickle of unease begins to replace the strange lethargy. Odysseus, his brow furrowed, decides to go himself, taking a couple more men with him. You follow, your feet sinking into the soft sand, the sweet aroma growing stronger with every step. You pass strange blooming trees with fruit that glows with an otherworldly luminescence, like a bioluminescent dessert. These are the lotus plants, and their fruit is the source of the island's peculiar magic. Soon, you come across them, your scouting party, but they're not scouting. They're sitting in a daze, their eyes wide and unfocused, their faces slack with a disturbing contentment. They're surrounded by the native inhabitants, the lotus eaters themselves, a gentle, almost childlike people, their movements slow, their expressions serene. They offer the fruit, plump and inviting, with a gesture of pure, innocent hospitality. Your men, utterly lost to the world, reach for it, chewing slowly, blissfully. "What is this?" Odysseus asks, his voice sharp with alarm. He tries to rouse his men, shaking one by the shoulder. "Come, we must go." "What have you done?" The man he shakes simply blinks, a slow, blissful smile spreading across his face. "Go? Why would we go?" he mumbles, his words slurring. Here there is only peace, only the lotus." It becomes horrifyingly clear. The lotus fruit isn't just a snack, it's a powerful narcotic. Once tasted, it makes you forget everything. Your home, your family, your burning desire to return to Ithaca. All memory of hardship, of loss, of purpose, simply melts away, replaced by an overwhelming, seductive apathy. You want nothing more than to stay on this island, eating the lotus, living in a haze of blissful forgetfulness. Tea is like a permanent, very chill vacation where you never have to worry about rent or that nagging feeling you left the stove on. It's a tempting offer, especially after 10 years of war and a terrifying storm. Imagine, for a moment, letting go of all your responsibilities, all your anxieties, all the things that keep you awake at night. Just peace, forever. It's a terrifyingly attractive proposition. But Odysseus, ever the man of purpose, is immune to its siren call. Perhaps his cunning mind, so tethered to problem solving, simply couldn't let go. Perhaps his love for Penelope and Telemachus was too strong a tether. Or maybe he just had an incredibly high tolerance for weird fruit. Regardless, he recognizes the danger immediately. This isn't a fight with monsters. It's a battle for his men's very souls, their identities. "Grab them," he barks, his voice cutting through the sweet stupor of the island. He orders his loyal companions to seize the dazed men, who offer no resistance, only soft, confused whimpers of protest. They are practically limp, their limbs heavy with the lotus's spell. You watch as Odysseus and his crew, sweating and straining, literally drag their comrades back to the ships, hoisting them aboard like sacks of grain. The men moan, pleading to be left behind, to return to the gentle, sweet oblivion. It's a harrowing sight. Odysseus has to bind them, tie them down to the benches in the ships, to prevent them from slipping away and returning to their lotus-induced paradise. Some scholars debate whether this was an act of mercy or an act of almost cruel determination. Was it right to force men back to a harsh reality they so willingly forgot? For Odysseus, the answer was unequivocally yes. His purpose was to get his men home, no matter what. The alternative was a permanent vegetative state of bliss, and that, for him, was no life at all. With the drugged men secured, sails are hoisted, and they quickly put to sea, leaving the sweet, deceptive shores of the lotus eaters behind. You feel the cool sea breeze on your face, a welcome antidote to the cloying warmth of the island. Slowly, the strange lethargy begins to dissipate. The men, still groggy and disoriented, begin to stir, the horrifying memories of their oblivion slowly trickling back. A few days at sea, and the lotus's effects will wear off entirely. But the memory of that tempting, forgetful peace will linger. Days turn into weeks. The journey is long and arduous. They sail further west, past lands that are unknown even to the most seasoned Greek sailors. The sun beats down, the sea stretches endlessly before them, and the men grumble about the strange, desolate places they are forced to visit. They're tired, they're hungry, and they're starting to lose faith. Then, on the horizon, appears a truly massive island, looms out of the mist, a vast, mountainous land. But this place isn't lush and sweet like the Lotus Eater's island. This is rugged, wild, and looks utterly untamed. High mountains pierce the sky, and along the coast you see rough, craggy cliffs. Smoke curls lazily from distant peaks, suggesting volcanic activity, or perhaps something more ancient. There are no signs of towns, no cultivated fields, no ordered harbors, just a raw, primal landscape. A good place to find water. Perhaps Odysseus muses, his sharp eyes scanning the shore. And perhaps food. He chooses 12 of his best men, including yourself, and ventures onto the island, leaving the rest of the fleet hidden in a cove. They pass through dense forests, the air thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. Eventually, they come upon a large cave, nestled into the side of a hill. It's enormous, easily big enough to house a small army, and judging by the sturdy, roughly hewn pens outside, it's clearly used to shelter livestock. A shepherd's cave. One of the men mutters, his voice hopeful. Perhaps we can get some cheese and milk. Odysseus, ever the curious one, decides to investigate. His men, however, are a little more pragmatic. Let's just take what we need and go, Captain, one suggests nervously. This place feels unsettling. They've learned their lesson about lingering, steal and run. It's the Greek way now, forged in the fires of Troy. But Odysseus, perhaps still buzzing from the intellectual victory over the Lotus Eaters, wants to meet the inhabitant. He hopes for a hospitable host, for gifts, for the kind of welcome proper between host and guest. Xenia, as the Greeks called it, a sacred bond. He insists they wait. A bit of a gamble, wouldn't you say? Leaving your fate in the hands of whoever lives in a giant cave with no discernible signs of civilization. That's our Odysseus for you. Brave to the point of recklessness when curiosity strikes. They enter the cave. It's indeed huge, rough-hewn, and smells strongly of sheep, goat, and something else. Something wilder, less domesticated. There are shelves laden with massive wheels of cheese, baskets overflowing with grapes, and large jars of milk and whey. It's a bounty, a veritable pastoral paradise. The men, their stomachs rumbling, waste no time. They light a fire, feast on the delicious cheese, drink the rich milk, and wait for the owner to return. The sun begins to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the cave mouth. You hear at first a distant rumble, a tremor that seems to shake the very ground. Then, closer, the distinct bleating of a massive flock of sheep. And finally, the footsteps, not the light tread of a man, or even a normal beast. These are colossal, earth-shaking thuds, each one making the cave floor vibrate. A shadow falls over the entrance. He is a horrifying sight, not just tall, but wide, muscular, monstrous. His skin is rough and leathery, his limbs like tree trunks, has a shaggy beard, and hair that looks like a tangled bush. But the most terrifying thing of all is his face. In the center of his forehead, where two eyes should be, there is only one. Single, enormous, bloodshot eye, fixed in a perpetual, unsettling glare. This is Polyphemus, a son of Poseidon himself, though Odysseus won't know that until much, much later. He carries a huge bundle of dry wood on his shoulder, and as he throws it down, It creates a thunderous crash that echoes through the cavern, sending splinters flying. He doesn't notice you at first, so perfectly do you blend into the shadows. Hey, he drives his immense flock of sheep and goats into the cave. Then, with a horrifying grunt, he bends down and lifts a truly gigantic boulder. Boulder so massive that 22 four-wheeled wagons could unmove it, as Homer so helpfully points out. Nand rolls it across the cave entrance, sealing them all inside. The cave is plunged into a chilling semi-darkness, the only light coming from the single, small opening at the top, or the fading light filtering through the edges of the enormous rock. You feel a sudden, crushing wave of dread. You are trapped. The Cyclops settles down, begins milking his youths and nannies, his large, rough hands surprisingly deft. He lights a fire, and in a flickering glow, he finally sees you. His single eye, piercing and malevolent, sweeps across the huddled figures. His voice is like grinding boulders, deep and guttural, shaking the very air. Are you pirates or mere travelers? Odysseus, stepping forward, attempts to invoke the sacred laws of Xenia. He introduces himself, explains their plight, quote, and appeals to the Cyclops' sense of divine hospitality, reminding him that Zeus himself watches over hosts and guests. We are Achaeans, returning from Troy, Odysseus declares, his voice trembling slightly, but holding firm, and we beg for your kindness, as is due to strangers under the protection of Zeus. Polyphemus merely grunts, a sound of contempt that makes the hair on your arms stand on end. You are a fool, stranger, or you have come from afar, he rumbles, his single eye glinting with a horrifying amusement. We Cyclopes care nothing for Zeus or your other gods. We are stronger than they. We have no laws but our own desires. And then, with a speed that belies his size, he reaches out. His enormous hand snatches two of Odysseus's men, plucking them up as easily as you would pick up a couple of grapes. You gasp, unable to move, frozen in terror. He smashes their heads against the cave floor, scattering their brains. Then, with an inhuman tearing sound, he rips them limb from limb, devouring them raw, bones and all. Like a ravenous beast, blood smears his face, drips from his beard. He slurps and crunches, a horrifying symphony of consumption. The screams die in your throat. The air, which moments ago smelled of cheese and sheep, is now thick with the stench of fresh blood and primal fear. Your stomach churns, threatening to revolt. Press yourself against a rough cave wall, trying to disappear, to become invisible. This isn't a human enemy, okay? This is a monster, a force of nature with a hunger that knows no bounds. Odysseus, his face ashen, clenches his jaw, his eyes wide with a desperate, calculating terror. They are utterly at his mercy, and it's a mercy that simply doesn't exist. Odysseus, his face ashen, clenches his jaw, his eyes wide with a desperate, calculating terror. They are utterly at his mercy, and it's a mercy that simply doesn't exist. The Cyclops, gorged on human flesh, lets out a massive burp, then stretches his monstrous limbs and lies down amidst his sheep, his single eye closing. The earth rumbles as he falls into a deep, sated sleep, his snores rattling the very stalactites above you. You remain frozen, pressed against the rough, cold stone, barely daring to breathe. The stench of blood is overpowering, a metallic temps that fills your nostrils and lingers in your throat. Your fallen comrades are nothing but smears on the cave floor, their bodies consumed. The silence, after the horrific sounds of his feast, is a heavy, suffocating blanket. Odysseus, ever the quick-thinking strategist, reaches for his sword. Your heart leaps. Is he going to attack? Now, while the monster sleeps? But he checks himself. His eyes scan the enormous boulder blocking the entrance. No, even if he plunged his sword into the Cyclops' eye, they'd still be trapped. The boulder was too heavy, the Cyclops too massive to move, even dead. They would simply starve to death beside his rotting corpse. A grim, terrifying realization. Escape had to be the priority. The night is endless, You shiver, not just from the cold seeping from the stone, but from sheer primal terror. Every shadow seems to morph into something grotesque. Every sound makes you jump. The surviving men huddled together, whispering prayers to gods who seem impossibly far away. You can't sleep. You just watch, waiting for the dawn and dreading it. Morning finally breaks, filtering through the cracks in the boulder, painting the cave walls in a sickly gray. Polyphemus stirs, stretches with another earth-shaking yawn, and without a word, snatches 2 more men, just like yesterday. Another pair of agonizing screams, another sickening crunch of bones, another feast of human flesh. Your blood runs cold again. This is his routine, just going to eat them 2 by 2 until they are all gone. This isn't just a monster, it's a terrifying, methodical slaughterhouse. After his gruesome breakfast, Polyphemus rolls away the boulder with impossible ease, sending another shudder through the cave. He then herds his flock out to pasture, carefully replacing the stone, sealing you back inside. You hear his guttural cries fading into the distance. Silence once more, but now it's a silence pregnant with despair. Only 8 men remain of the original 12. Odysseus, however, does not despair for long. The glint in his eye changes from terror to fierce determination. He begins to formulate a plan. You watch him, his mind racing, his gaze darting around the cave. He notices a massive, freshly cut olive club leaning against the wall. A tree trunk the size of a ship's mast, which the Cyclops uses as a walking stick. He selects 4 of his strongest men, and you can help but notice he's still got more than enough men for an away mission. Not exactly strapped for numbers yet, which is a dark thought, and together they saw off a 6-foot section of the enormous club. They then sharpen one end to a wickedly pointed tip, hardening it in the fire's embers. It's crude, but effective. You can feel the heat radiating from the treated wood, the air filled with the scent of scorching timber. This is their weapon. Desperate shot. We will offer him wine, Odysseus explains, his voice low, his eyes burning with a dangerous resolve. We will make him drunk, so drunk he falls into a stupor. Then we will blind him. The plan is audacious, bordering on insane. When Polyphemus returns that evening, he again rolls away the boulder, herds his flock inside, and, as usual, devours 2 more men for his dinner. Your remaining number dwindles to 6. The air is thick with the smell of death, but this time it's mixed with the faint hope of a desperate plan. Odysseus, surprisingly composed, steps forward, carries a goatskin filled with a strong, unmixed wine, a gift from Moran, a priest of Apollo, saved from the sack of Ismarus. This wasn't your average Greek wine. It was potent, meant to be diluted with 20 parts water, but Odysseus brought it full strength. This was the ancient world's equivalent of moonshine, or maybe a rocket fuel cocktail. Cyclops, Odysseus calls out, his voice steady despite the trembling in your knees. Since you're feasted on our flesh, take this drink, if you wish to know what liquor we carried. We brought it as an offering, had you shown us hospitality. Polyphemus, intrigued by the novelty, takes the skin. He gulps it down. His single eye widens. He's never tasted anything like it. He asks for more and more. He drinks the entire skin, his rough, guttural grunts slowly turning into a slurred, almost jovial babble. The potent, undiluted wine quickly takes hold, sending the monstrous Cyclops into a stupor. What is your name, stranger? Polyphemus slurs, a drunken grin spreading across his face, his single eye bleary. Tell me your name, so I may give you a guest gift. Odysseus, his heart hammering against his ribs, delivers the crucial line, the one that would echo through history. My name, he says, with a brilliant, chilling smile, is No Man. No Man is my name. My father and mother call me No Man, and so do all my comrades, or Odysseus in Greek, meaning nobody. A classic literary pun which is always fun when your life hangs in the balance. Polyphemus laughs. It's a deep, rumbling sound. Then, "No man, this is my guest's gift to you. I will eat you last, after all your companions." And with that grotesque promise, the giant topples over, unconscious, his head hitting the cave floor with a thud that vibrates through the rock. His snores resume, even louder now, almost deafening. Odysseus signals. You and the remaining men move quickly, silently. You grab the sharpened olive stake, its tip glowing faintly from the fire's heat. Together, with a surge of adrenaline, you lift the massive implement. Odysseus takes the lead, directing the others. Ye braced yourselves, muscles straining, and with a guttural roar from Odysseus, you plunge the fiery, sharpened stake into the Cyclops' single, enormous eye. A sizzling, spitting noise, like metal plunged into water, but infinitely louder, accompanied by the reek of burning flesh and eyeballs. Polyphemus lets out an unearthly shriek, a bellow of agony that shakes the very cave to its foundations, making your ears ring. He writhes on the ground, tearing at the stake, trying to pull it out, his enormous hands flailing wildly. He's roaring, thrashing, a mountain of blind, enraged fury. You pull the stake back out, the eye ruined, a steaming, bloody ruin. He stumbles to his feet, bellowing, his arms outstretched, trying to grab you, to crush you, to tear you limb from limb. The air is filled with his howls of pain and rage. You scramble, terrified, trying to avoid his blind sweeps, pressing yourselves against the cave walls, dodging his enormous hands. His cries echo outside the cave. The cyclopes, his monstrous neighbors, living in similar caves on the island, hear his screams. "What is it, Polyphemus?" They thunder, their voices like distant thunder. "Who is harming you in your sleep?" "No man is ruining me by trickery." The other cyclopes, hearing no man, simply shrugged their enormous shoulders. "No man is hurting you, then it must be a sickness sent by the gods." Call back, a hint of ancient, monstrous superstition in their voices. "You must pray to your father, Poseidon." And with that, they leave him to his suffering. The cleverness of the name No Man proves its worth. Though you can imagine Polyphemus felt pretty silly the next day, realizing he'd been outsmarted by a pun. The ancient world's version of a dad joke gone terribly wrong. Polyphemus, still raging, stumbles to the cave entrance. He rolls away the boulder, his blind fury overriding his usual caution. He sits there, his immense hands outstretched, waiting. He plans to fill every sheep as it leaves, hoping to catch the men as they try to slip out. The air, once thick with the smell of gore, is now tinged with the acrid scent of sulfur and rage. Dawn arrives, the time for escape. Odysseus, ever the master of improvisation, comes up with the next stroke of genius. He ties his men, 3 by 3, beneath the bellies of Polyphemus's prize rams. The central ram would carry a man, and a ram on either side would shield him. You watch, heart in your throat, as you and the others slide under the thick, shaggy bellies of the sheep, clinging tightly to their wool. Your hands getting tangled in the surprisingly coarse fibers. You can smell the sheep, a powerful, musky scent, mixed with the sweat of your fear. Odysseus, being the smartest of the bunch, saves the largest ram for himself, clinging to its underside, feeling its strong, warm belly against his face. Ithaca, eager to get out to pasture, begin to move towards the cave entrance. You feel the heavy, thudding hooves of the sheep around you, the gentle sway of the ram's body. You hear Polyphemus's rough hands patting the backs of his sheep as they pass, murmuring to them. "My good ram," he rumbles, "why are you lagging? You are always the first out." Because you pity your master, blinded by that wretched no man. He touches the ram you're clinging to, his huge, blunt fingers brushing mere inches from your face. You hold your breath, your muscles rigid, your heart threatening to burst from your chest. It's an eternity, a moment stretched to an unbearable tension. Then the ram passes through, and you're outside. The fresh air, the sunlight on your face, never felt so glorious. One by one, the rams emerge, and one by one, the men hidden beneath them are safe. You untie yourselves, quickly and silently, and begin herding the remaining sheep down to the ships. Typically, there'll be much needed provisions. As you reach the ships, the relief is overwhelming. But then, Odysseus, for all his cunning, succumbs to a fatal flaw. Hubris, he just can't resist. He has to rub it in. He has to taunt the monster who tried to eat him. Cyclops, he shouts, his voice echoing across the water as you push off from shore. If any man asks you who it was that put out your eye, tell him it was Odysseus, son of Laertes, king of Ithaca, sacker of cities. You cringe. Oh, Odysseus. Why? It's a classic hero move, declaring your name and lineage, but in this case, it's a disastrous act of boastful pride. The very air around you crackles with the weight of it. Polyphemus, hearing the name, lets out another howl of rage. He tears off the top of a mountain, a massive, jagged peak, and hurls it in the direction of Odysseus's voice. The boulder sails through the air. A monstrous projectile lands just in front of the leading ship, creating a tidal wave that pushes them back towards the shore. You scramble to regain control, desperate to get away. Then, the Cyclops kneels, his enormous, ruined eye turned towards the sky. Hear me, great Poseidon, Earthshaker, for I am your son. He bellows, his voice thick with tears and fury. If it be your will that Odysseus, son of Laertes, shall return home, then let him do so late, in sore distress, with all his comrades lost, and find great trouble in his house. The curse hangs in the air, a dark cloud settling over your escape. This isn't just a monster's empty threat. This is a direct appeal to a god, and not just any god, the very god who already has a massive grudge against the Greeks for Troy, the same god who sent that initial storm. You can practically hear the sea god listening, nodding his enormous, watery head. It's the price of Odysseus's pride. You row frantically, straining at the oars, putting as much distance as possible between yourselves and the cursed island. Polyphemus, still raging, hurls another massive rock, which lands behind the ships, creating a wave that ironically pushes them away from the shore. A stroke of luck, perhaps, or just the chaotic aftermath of a giant's tantrum. You sail away, leaving the cries of the blinded monster behind, with the chilling echoes of his curse, and the silent, heavy presence of Poseidon's looming wrath sail with you. You were down to 6 men on Odysseus' ship, the other ships of the fleet still accounted for, but the entire crew is shaken. They are survivors, yes, but the cost has been immense. The immediate relief of escape is quickly replaced by a gnawing dread. Days turn into a weary blur of sailing. The sea, once an enemy, now feels like a temporary refuge, albeit one watched by a vengeful god. The men are quiet, the usual boisterousness replaced by a grim determination. You count your blessings, but the losses weigh heavily. The Cyclops episode has truly hammered home the idea that this journey is not just long, but filled with unimaginable, horrifying dangers. Eventually, on the 7th day after their escape, a new land appears on the horizon. It is an island, round as a table, rising sheer from the sea, surrounded by a wall of bronze, or so it appears. This is Aialia, the floating island of Aeolus, the divine keeper of the winds, a floating island. Yep, the Greeks had some wild ideas about geography. You approach cautiously. Unlike the Cyclops' crude cave, this island seems ordered, civilized. As you draw closer, you see a magnificent palace built on a rocky peak, gleaming in the sunlight. This is a divine residence, not a monster's lair. Aeolus himself is a benevolent figure, not a god in the traditional sense, but a friend of the gods, appointed by Zeus to manage the world's winds. He lives a life of idyllic peace with his wife and 12 children, 6 sons and 6 daughters, who were married to each other, a peculiar but apparently accepted custom of divine matrimony. Bit odd, even for gods, don't you think? It definitely keeps the family tree compact. Odysseus, ever the charming diplomat, introduces himself and his men. Aeolus, being a hospitable and curious sort, welcomes them warmly. He's fascinated by their tales of Troy, of the Great War, of the Trojan Horse, and of their harrowing escape from Polyphemus. You and the men feast for a full month, enjoying the lavish hospitality, gorging on delicious food and drink, forgetting for a little while the horrors they've endured. It's a much-needed respite, a chance to heal, to laugh, to simply be without the constant threat of death. Imagine a month-long vacation in a divine resort, all-inclusive, no questions asked, pure bliss. When it's finally time to leave, Aeolus, pleased with Odysseus and his stories, offers a truly remarkable gift. A leather bag made from the hide of a 9-year-old ox, tightly tied with a silver cord. This bag contains all the tempestuous winds, the raging gales, the fierce squalls that could blow them off course. All of them, Aeolus, with his divine power, has bottled up the bad weather. He leaves only the gentle west wind, Zephyr, free to blow, to waft them safely home to Ithaca. Do not open this bag, Odysseus, Aeolus warns, his voice kind but firm. Do not let your men open it. Only I can control these forces. Odysseus, of course, accepts the gift, secures it carefully, and makes sure it's kept close, lashed to the mast, a constant, tempting presence. This is it. With the west wind gently filling their sails, Ithaca is now within their grasp. You sail for 9 days and 9 nights, a smooth, swift journey, aided by the favorable wind. Odysseus, utterly exhausted from the strain of being the sole navigator and the pressure of keeping the precious bag safe, doesn't sleep for the entire duration. His eyes are constantly fixed on the sails, on the horizon, on the bag. Seriously, a full 9 days without sleep. That's dedication. Or maybe just pure, unadulterated paranoia. On the 10th morning, you see it, the familiar outline of Ithaca, the rugged peaks, the rocky shores, the sight of smoke curling from distant hearths. Home. It's so close, you can almost taste it. You can almost smell the thyme, the olives, the familiar scents of your own land. The men cheer, tears streaming down their faces. You've made it. After years of war, after monsters, after storms, after everything, you are finally home. You can even see the people on the shore, the faint outlines of their homes. Odysseus, seeing his homeland, finally allows himself to relax. He's been awake for days, his body screaming for rest. He lies down, just for a moment, to catch a precious few winks of sleep. A tiny, well-deserved nap. This is where it all goes horribly, tragically wrong. The men who have endured so much, who have seen so many comrades die, are suspicious. They've watched Odysseus guard that bag with his life, never letting it out of his sight. They've seen him collect massive amounts of treasure from Troy and the Chersonese. Now, on the verge of home, they whisper, "What is in that bag?" They murmur to each other, their voices laced with envy and greed. Surely, Odysseus has kept all the gold and silver for himself. Why else would he guard it so fiercely? They convince themselves that the bag is filled with untold riches, treasure that Odysseus is hoarding. They forget the words of Aeolus, forget the warnings. Their exhaustion, their suspicion, their greed, and frankly, a hefty dose of bad judgment overwhelmed them. As Odysseus sleeps soundly for the first time in days, they creep forward. Their fingers, trembling with anticipation, fumble with the silver cord. They untie the bag. The moment the knot loosens, all hell breaks loose. The bottled winds, the raging tempest, the squalls, the gales, the hurricanes are unleashed. With a roar like 1,000 dragons, they burst forth, tearing the sails from the masts, ripping through the rigging, sending the ships spinning wildly. The sea churns into a frothing, chaotic maelstrom. The ships, so close to safety, are instantly snatched up by the furious winds and hurled back out to sea, away from Ithaca, away from home. Odysseus wakes to chaos. He sees the swirling winds, feels the violent lurch of his ship, and understands immediately. His heart sinks, great despair, and an overwhelming sense of futility wash over him. He considers throwing himself overboard, ending it all right there. But the thought of Penelope and Telemachus, still waiting, pulls him back from the brink. He has to try again. He always has to try. The winds, now free and furious, push them relentlessly, further and further east, away from the familiar waters of home, back across the endless, hostile sea. They struggle against the impossible force, but it's no use. The gods, or at least the winds, are against them. After days of being battered and blown, they finally, miraculously, find themselves back at Itaca, the floating island, the place they had left so triumphantly just 10 days earlier. Odysseus, defeated and humbled, goes to Aeolus's palace. He explains what happened, begging the wind god for help, for a second chance. My men, in their folly, opened the bag, he confesses, shame coloring his voice. We beg you, release the west wind once more. Help us return home. Aeolus is no longer the benevolent host. He looks at Odysseus, his face stern, his eyes filled with a grim understanding. Begone, Odysseus, he says, his voice like the rustling of dry leaves. You are the most ill-fated man alive. It is clear now that no god favors your return. If I were to help you again, I would incur their wrath myself. It's a chilling rejection. The gods themselves have declared Odysseus' journey cursed. Aeolus sends them away, refusing any further assistance. There's no more food, no more rest, no more hope of divine aid. Just the open sea, the vast, indifferent sky, and the knowledge that they are utterly alone in their struggle. With heavy hearts, their spirits crushed, Odysseus and his men leave Aeolia once more. This time, there's no gentle zephyr to guide them. They are forced to row tirelessly, day after day, their muscles aching, their hands blistering. They are lost, without a chart, without a favorable wind, just relying on the strength of their arms and Odysseus' grim determination. They sail for 6 long, agonizing days and nights, rowing relentlessly. They pass desolate stretches of sea, seeing no land, no ships, no sign of life. Despair settles over the men like a shroud. Then, on the 7th day, a terrifying sight looms into view. A land surrounded by high, precipitous cliffs, rising straight out of the water. The harbor is narrow, a deep, funnel-shaped inlet, almost like a massive, jagged mouth. It's a natural, sheltered port, perfect for anchoring a fleet. But something about it feels wrong, unnatural. Odysseus, ever cautious, sends 3 ships, his own included, further into the harbor, while the others remain outside, just beyond the narrow entrance, to keep a lookout. The land itself is strange. There are no fields, no pastures, no cultivated areas, just wild, imposing forests and towering, dark peaks. Smoke rises from distant, unseen habitations, but the scale of everything seems off. As they venture deeper into the strange harbor, the air grows still and heavy. The silence is profound, broken only by the creak of their oars and the lapping of water against the hulls. It's a silence that feels less like peace and more like a held breath. Odysseus sends out a small scouting party, led by 2 of his officers, to find out what kind of people live here and if there is any fresh water. The men disembark and follow a winding path inland. They walk for some time until they come across a strange sight, a young woman drawing water from a spring. She is unusually tall, almost impossibly so, with a powerful build. Who lives here? Gentle maiden, Sven asks, trying to be polite, trying to remember the lessons of hospitality. The maiden points him towards the house of her father, Antiphas, the king of this land. A king, perhaps, finally, a friendly face, a hospitable host. Oh, how they yearn for a repeat of Aeolus' hospitality. Forgetting the caveat, the men, hopeful, follow her directions. They arrive at a colossal house made of logs, its proportions immense, clearly built for inhabitants of extraordinary size. They knock. A woman appears in the doorway. She is even larger than the maiden by the spring. She is, in fact, a towering, monstrous figure, as big as a mountain. Her face is grim, her features crude. She is Antiphates' wife, and she looks at the tiny mortals with a chilling, predatory hunger in her eyes. Without a word, she lets out an ear-splitting shriek and charges. This isn't a human. This is a giant, a giantess. The scouts turn and flee, terrified. One of them isn't fast enough. The monstrous woman snatches him up, just like Polyphemus did, and devours him on the spot, while the other two run back towards the ships, screaming in terror. The cry of the giantess, a guttural, inhuman sound, echoes through the strange, enclosed harbor. It's a signal. It's from every direction, from the peaks above, from the forests, from the colossal houses. Enormous figures emerge. They are the Lastrygonians, a race of cannibalistic giants, and they are hungry. They appear on the cliff tops overlooking the harbor, their forms silhouetted against the sky. They are throwing boulders, not small rocks, not stones, but massive, house-sized boulders, ripping them from the cliffs and hurling them down into the harbor below. The ships, trapped in the narrow, funnel-shaped bay, are sitting ducks. The boulders rain down, smashing through the decks, crushing the hulls, sending splinters and screams into the air. It's a massacre. The sound is deafening. The crash of stone on wood, the splintering of timbers, the dying screams of men. One after another, the ships are obliterated, sunk, turned into shattered wreckage. The water churns with dying men and debris. It's not a battle, it's an execution. You watch in horror as your comrades, men who survived Troy, the Chaconas, the storm, the cyclopes, are utterly annihilated, crushed like insects. The Lastrygonians laugh, their booming voices echoing as they wade into the water, spearing the drowning men like fish, pulling them from the wreckage and carrying them back to their homes for a gruesome feast. Odysseus, seeing the horror unfolding, reacts instantly. His own ship is the only one tied outside the narrow mouth of the harbor. "Cut the cables," he screams, his voice raw with despair and urgency. "Row, row for your lives." His men, already on the verge of breakdown, manage to obey. They cut the cables, throw themselves at the oars, and with desperate, superhuman effort, they pull. They row for the open sea, leaving the inferno of the harbor behind. You hear the shouts of the giants, the splash of more boulders, but none reach you. Only Odysseus' single ship escapes. All the other ships, all the other men, are gone, crushed, devoured, vanished. It's a devastating loss, the most brutal setback yet. You are utterly alone now, a tiny, fragile speck on the vast, unforgiving sea, heading into yet another unknown, with only a handful of terrified men by your side. Where to now, and what horrors await you next? Odysseus, his single, last ship, sliced through the water, leaving the blood-soaked, rock-strewn horror of the Lastrygonian harbor behind. The air, which had been thick with the screams of your dying comrades, was now simply the cold, salty bite of the open sea. You and the remaining men, a mere handful, perhaps 50 souls out of the hundreds who had set out from Troy, were utterly silent. No celebratory shouts, no tired grumbling, just the rhythmic dip and pull of the oars, each stroke a testament to their desperate flight, their raw survival. The weight of their losses was a physical thing, pressing down on the cramped deck, heavier than any cargo. This wasn't just a defeat, it was an annihilation. You had looked into the abyss, and it had swallowed almost everyone you knew. Where to now? and what horrors await you next. For days, they rode. No sails, no favorable winds. Just the relentless, agonizing rhythm of human effort against the vast indifference of the sea. The sun beat down, turning their skin to leather. Their muscles screamed with every stroke. Hunger gnawed, thirst parched, but fear, a cold, constant companion, spurred them on. Every ripple on the water, every distant cloud, felt like a fresh threat. They were broken, bruised, and utterly adrift, a tiny sliver of humanity lost in an endless, hostile blue. You could almost feel the eyes of Poseidon on your back. The lingering curse of the blinded cyclopes, a chilling whisper in the wind. This wasn't a journey anymore. It was a desperate crawl towards an unknown fate. Then, on the third day, a faint outline appeared on the horizon. An island. It seemed to shimmer in the heat haze, lush and green, surrounded by a thick, dark forest. It looked peaceful, inviting a welcome relief after the stark, murderous cliffs of the Lastrygonians. But after all they'd endured, peaceful felt like a trap, and inviting like a lie. This was Aya, the island of Circe, the beautiful, terrifying sorceress. Apia, but they didn't know that yet. All they saw was land, a chance for fresh water, perhaps some game. Odysseus, ever the cautious leader, though sometimes, as we've seen, his curiosity gets the better of him, decided against sending a scouting party immediately. He anchored his ship in a quiet cove and led the remaining men inland himself, a compact, nervous unit. They climbed a rocky promontory and from its height surveyed the island. It was indeed a paradise, at least superficially. Forest stretched for miles, a river snaked through a verdant valley, and in the distance, a thin plume of smoke curled lazily into the sky, signaling human habitation. Someone lives here, Odysseus murmured, his brow furrowed. But who? He decided to go alone, to be the first point of contact, a testament to his protective instincts towards his dwindling crew. He strung his bow, slung his sword, and ventured deeper into the woods. As he walked, a magnificent stag, massive and antlered, bounded out of the forest, heading towards the river to drink. Providence, a gift from the gods, or at least a practical solution to their gnawing hunger. Odysseus, a skilled hunter, brought it down with a single, well-aimed arrow. He returned to the ship, the enormous stag slung over his shoulder, a beacon of hope for his starving men. Their faces, gaunt and grim, lit up with a flicker of something akin to joy. They'd butchered the beast, feasted on its rich meat, and for a short while, the suffocating dread lifted, replaced by the simple, profound satisfaction of a full belly. It was a brief reprieve, but a vital one, reminding them that survival was still possible. The next morning, fortified by meat and a sliver of renewed hope, Odysseus divided his men into two companies. One he led himself, staying by the ship. The other, consisting of 22 men, was led by Eurylochus, a dependable but often fearful officer, the kind of guy who always saw the worst-case scenario and wasn't afraid to voice it. Eurylochus was the anti-Odysseus, cautious to a fault, but loyal. Mostly, be careful, Odysseus warned Eurylochus, his eyes serious. We've met enough strange folk. He was thinking of the Lotus Eaters, the Cyclops, the Lastrygonians. Eurylochus nodded, grim-faced, already bracing for the worst. Eurylochus and his men trudged through the dense, silent forest, the air growing heavy with an unfamiliar sweetness, reminiscent of the Lotus Eaters, but less cloying, more chanting. They eventually came to a clearing, and in its center stood a magnificent palace built of polished stone, surrounded by a strange, unsettling collection of animals. Lions, wolves, and bears, not prowling, not snarling, but lying docilely, wagging their tails, fawning over the approaching men like household pets. You'd think this would be a massive red flag. Wild predators acting like golden retrievers. Clearly, something was off, but the men, weary and perhaps desperate for a normal encounter, were drawn in. From inside the palace, they heard a woman's voice singing. Her voice was clear and beautiful, accompanied by the rhythmic clatter of a loom. It was an irresistible sound, full of melody and promise. All the men, save Eurylochus, called out to her. The palace doors opened, and there she was, Circe. She was stunning, truly breathtaking, with long, flowing hair and eyes that sparkled with an intelligent, almost mischievous light. She invited them in, her smile warm, her hospitality seemingly genuine. The men, their fears momentarily forgotten, eagerly entered, drawn by her beauty and the promise of rest. Eurylochus, however, hesitated. Something about the tame beasts, the unsettling beauty of the sorceress, a prickle of instinct born from their recent horrors, held him back. He watched from a distance as his comrades disappeared into the palace. Inside, Circe offered the men a meal: cheese, barley, and honey, mixed with a potent, dark wine. It looked delicious, a welcome change from raw stag and hardtack. But unbeknownst to them, into this mixture, Circe had stirred a powerful drug, a magical potion designed to make them forget their homes, their purpose, everything that tethered them to their human lives. It was similar to the lotus, perhaps, but with a more corporeal outcome. As soon as they had eaten and drunk, Circe touched each man with her wand. Poof! In an instant, they were transformed, not into monsters, not into ghosts, but into pigs. Not just any pigs, but perfectly formed, grunt-snouting, trotter-hooved pigs. They retained their human minds, their capacity for sorrow and fear, but they were trapped in swine bodies, herded into sties, forced to eat acorns and slop. Can you imagine? One moment you're eating cheese, the next you're rooting around in the mud, still thinking, "Oh God, Penelope, I'm so sorry." It's a truly humiliating fate, one that must have added insult to injury. Eurylochus, watching from outside, saw the transformation. He saw the doors close, the silence fall. He knew. Terror gripped him. He turned and ran, sprinting back through the forest, stumbling and sobbing, his face pale with horror. He finally reached the ship, gasping, breathless, barely able to speak. "They're gone, Odysseus," he cried, tears streaming down his face. "Okay, they were transformed into pigs. It's a sorceress. We must flee." The remaining men were aghast, their faces mirroring Eurylochus's terror. This was a new level of horror. Not death, but something arguably worse, a perverse, magical enslavement. Odysseus, however, did not flinch. His face hardened. He slung his silver-hilted sword over his shoulder and grasped his bow. "Show me the way, Eurylochus," he commanded, his voice firm. "I must go. I must rescue them." Eurylochus fell to his knees, clutching Odysseus's legs. "No, my lord, do not go. You will surely perish, and then none of us will ever reach home. Let us flee. This is a trap." But Odysseus, with his unshakable loyalty to his men, and perhaps a touch of his characteristic recklessness, refused. "I am going," he declared, pulling free. "Stay here, if you wish, but I will not abandon my men." He was the kind of leader who would always go into the belly of the beast for his crew. It's why they loved him, and frankly, why they were often in so much trouble. He set off alone, following Eurylochus's frantic directions. He walked with grim determination, his sword ready, his heart resolute. The air grew sweeter, the tame beasts began to appear, but Odysseus was alert, prepared for treachery. Then, just as he neared the palace, a young man appeared before him. He was radiant, glowing with an otherworldly light, carrying a golden wand. This was Hermes, the swift messenger of the gods, sent by Zeus himself, who perhaps felt a pang of pity for Odysseus, or simply enjoyed meddling. Hermes, always the cool, casual god, probably just figured Odysseus needed a cheat code for this level. "Wretched man," Hermes said, his voice melodious. "Why do you walk this path alone? Your companions are trapped within, turned into swine. Atam, do not go there, or you too will suffer their fate. Odysseus, surprised but not deterred, listened carefully. Hermes, ever helpful, offered a solution. He pulled from the ground a magical herb, a plant called moly. It had a black root and a white flower, and for a mortal, it was incredibly difficult to dig up. Scholars still debate what plant moly might represent. Some say snowdrop, some say rue, others dismiss it as purely mythical. Whatever it was potent. Take this, Hermes instructed, handing the herb to Odysseus. It is a charm against Circe's magic. When she offers you her potion, drink it. This herb will protect you. But when she strikes you with her wand, draw your sharp sword and rush at her, as if to kill her. She will be afraid and will offer to share her bed. Do not refuse her embrace, for then she will swear a solemn oath by the blessed gods that she will do you no further harm and will not plot against you. Now, about that bad part. This is an ancient Greek epic where hospitality, even divine hospitality, often came with perks. For a hero in the ancient world, it wasn't seen as infidelity, but rather an act of asserting dominance over a powerful female figure, and often, quite literally, sealing a treaty or a promise. Plus, gods were always doing it. Think of it as a very old, very complex power play. Keep it PG-13, as per the rules, but acknowledge the implication. Odysseus thanked Hermes profusely, swallowing the moly. He felt a surge of confidence. Armed with divine aid and a clever plan, he approached Circe's palace. A key called out, and again, Circe appeared, beautiful and welcoming. She invited him in, offering the same fatal potion. Odysseus drank. He felt nothing. No transformation, no daze. Circe's surprise watched him intently. She then raised her wand, fully expecting to transform him into a pig. But as she touched him, Odysseus sprang forward, drawing his sword with a flash of steel, lunging at her as if to strike. Circe shrieked, falling to her knees, her eyes wide with terror. She recognized him instantly as the man Hermes had prophesied would come. No mortal man has ever resisted my potion. You must be Odysseus, the man of many turns, whom Hermes foretold. Put away your sword, and let us share a bed, so that trust may grow between us. Odysseus, remembering Hermes' instructions, refused to relent until she had sworn a solemn oath by the Styx, the unbreachable river of the underworld, that she would do him no harm and would release his men. And yes, they did share her bed, cementing their alliance, a union of power and necessity. After their negotiation, Odysseus demanded his men be restored. Circe, now under oath and perhaps genuinely impressed by his wit and courage, agreed. She led him to the sties where his pigmen languished. She anointed each one with another counter potion, and with the touch of her wand, poof, they were men again. And not just men, but younger, stronger, more handsome than before. A magical spa treatment after a pigsty ordeal. Sign me up. The men, disoriented at first, then overjoyed, rushed to embrace Odysseus, tears of relief and gratitude streaming down their faces. It was a chaotic, emotional reunion. Eurylochus, who had stayed behind, came running when he heard the commotion, equally relieved, but probably still a bit miffed that Odysseus had been right. Circe, now a generous and solicitous host, invited Odysseus and all his men to stay at her palace. The weary survivors, overjoyed to be human again and safe at last, gratefully accepted. And so, Odysseus and his remaining crew stayed on Ia. They feasted, they drank, they rested, forgetting the horrors of their journey, forgetting the very purpose of their voyage. They were pampered, indulged, their wounds healing, their spirits mending. Circe, perhaps finding genuine companionship with the clever mortal, continued to treat them with kindness and generosity. It was a powerful illusion of peace, a seductive pause in their endless suffering. They were almost too comfortable, too content, like a very, very long, all-inclusive resort stay, where you lose all sense of time and responsibility. But eventually, the men started to stir. They had forgotten their longing for home, but it was a deep, quiet ache that never truly went away. And Eurylochus, ever the pragmatist, ever the one to voice inconvenient truths, finally approached Odysseus. "Odysseus," he said, his voice firm, though tinged with desperation. "What madness possesses you? We should be thinking of our homeland. It is time to leave this place." His words, blunt and direct, pierced through the golden haze of Circe's hospitality. The other men, too, began to grumble, to look at Odysseus with pleading eyes. They missed their families. They missed their lives. The allure of comfort began to fade, replaced by the gnawing pull of home. Odysseus, jolted back to his senses, knew they were right. He had lingered too long, almost falling victim to a different kind of enchantment, the enchantment of ease and forgetfulness. He went to Circe, who was still deeply enamored with him. "Circe," he said, "it is time. My men yearn for home. I must leave." Circe, though sad to see him go, did not try to stop him. She was a sorceress, yes, but also a figure of divine knowledge. She knew his path was not yet complete. She revealed a terrible truth, a necessary detour. "Odysseus," she said, her voice grave, "you cannot simply sail home from here. Before you can reach your homeland, you must journey to the house of Hades and dread Persephone. You must consult the spirit of Tiresias, the blind prophet of Thebes, whose mind alone remains unclouded among the dead. He will tell you the way home and all the trials that await you." The news hit him like a physical blow. The underworld, descent into the realm of the dead, a place no living mortal was meant to see and return from. It was a horrifying prospect, far more terrifying than any monster. But for Odysseus, a man who always sought knowledge and a way forward, it was a task that, however daunting, had to be undertaken. It was the ultimate scholarly debate, life versus the afterlife, and how to navigate the bureaucratic nightmare of dead prophets. He returned to his men, the dreadful news on his lips. Their faces, which had been full of anticipation for home, instantly fell. They groaned, they wept, they beat their breasts. The idea of sailing to the realm of the dead was almost too much to bear, but they had no choice. Odysseus gave the orders to prepare the ship. As they were making ready, a new tragedy struck, a mundane, almost pathetic death that stood in stark contrast to the epic battles and monstrous encounters they'd faced. One of their youngest crewmen, Elpenor, a relatively minor character, not particularly brave or clever, but a loyal enough lad, had drunk too much wine the night before. He had fallen asleep on the roof of Circe's palace, perhaps trying to catch some cool air. In his stupor, roused by the shouts and clamor of the men preparing to depart, he forgot the long ladder. He tried to climb down, stumbled, and fell headlong from the roof, breaking his neck. He died instantly, a clumsy, unheroic end. It was a grim reminder of their mortality, of the fragility of life, even without monsters or gods. They buried him quickly, without proper rites, for Circe had already outlined the route to the underworld, and haste was paramount. They would return for him, Odysseus promised, after their grim errand. With heavy hearts, their ship now smaller, their crew diminished by one more unfortunate soul, they hoisted the sail, feeling the breath of a new, favorable wind. Circe, as a final act of guidance, had helped them set their course. They sailed through the calm waters, heading not west towards home, but north and west, towards the edge of the known world, towards the entrance to the realm of the dead. The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sea in a mournful, bruised purple. Lay darkness and the chilling prospect of a journey into the great unknown, a place where only the bravest or the most desperate dared to tread. The real Odyssey was about to begin, and it was going to take them to hell and back. Literally, The sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sea in a mournful, bruised purple. Ahead lay darkness and the chilling prospect of a journey into the great unknown, a place where only the bravest or the most desperate dared to tread. The real Odyssey was about to begin, and it was going to take them to hell and back. Literally, the men, already broken by the Lastrygonians, groaned at the very mention of Hades. You could practically see their remaining courage shriveling like old fruit. But there was no arguing with the sorceress, especially one who seemed to have a direct line to divine mandates. And honestly, after what they'd seen, a journey to the land of the dead almost felt inevitable. It's just another stop on the world's worst travel itinerary. They sailed with grim determination, guided by Circe's instructions. The winds, surprisingly, remained favorable, a small mercy from a universe that otherwise seemed bent on their destruction. For days, you felt the ship pushing through increasingly heavy mists, the sunlight growing dimmer, the air colder, thicker, even oppressive. The familiar tang of salt spray was replaced by a cloying, earthy scent, like damp soil and forgotten things, and the very atmosphere seemed to drain the life from your bones. This wasn't the kind of fog that just obscured your vision. This was a spiritual dampness, settling deep. As they approached the edge of the world, the sea itself seemed to change. The currents grew sluggish, the waves became long, slow swells, and the water took on a murky, leaden hue. You could almost feel the weight of eternity pressing down, according to ancient Greek cosmology. The entrance to the underworld was often described as being at the very limits of the habitable world. Beyond the ocean stream that encircled the earth was a place of perpetual gloom, where the sun never truly shone, a land of the Cimmerians shrouded in mist and shadow. Homer's description makes it sound less like a fiery abyss and more like an eternally overcast, really depressing Tuesday. Finally, they reached their destination, a desolate, sunless shore. The landscape was bleak, featureless save for a few gaunt, skeletal trees and a river, which you instinctively knew was the Acheron, the river of woe. The air was still, silent, save for the faint, unsettling whisper of unseen presences. The silence of the dead. It's the kind of quiet that makes your own heartbeats sound like a drum solo. Odysseus ordered the men to beach the ship. Their movements were slow, burdened by the palpable dread of the place. They were on the threshold, a living crew standing on the verge of the dead. Following Circe's meticulous instructions, Odysseus took charge of the grim ritual. First, they dug a trench, a cubit long and a cubit wide. Then came the libations. You watched as Odysseus poured out offerings to all the dead, milk and honey, then sweet wine, and finally pure water. Over these, he sprinkled white barley meal. Each offering was a silent prayer, a desperate plea for passage and guidance. Next came the sacrifices. From the flock they brought from Circe's island, Odysseus led forward a black ewe and a black ram, animals whose dark color symbolized their connection to the chthonic or underworld deities. He cut their throats, letting their dark blood pour directly into the trench. The smell was sharp, coppery, and shockingly potent. It was the scent that would draw the shades of the dead. It's like ringing the dinner bell, but for ghosts. As the dark blood soaked into the earth, a horrifying sight began to unfold. From the depths, from every direction, the spirits of the dead began to rise. They swarmed towards the trench, a pale, gibbering throng, drawn by the scent of the fresh, warm blood. You could feel their chilling presence, the air growing colder as they pressed closer, their desperate, insubstantial forms, eager for a taste of life. Odysseus, brave as ever, stood firm, sword drawn, preventing the lesser spirits from approaching the blood before Tiresias, the prophet, had come. His face was grim, but his resolve held. He knew the ritual, he knew the stakes, and then he saw him. The first shade, distinct and heartbreakingly familiar. It was Elpenor, the poor, unlucky soul who had fallen from Circe's roof. He appeared before them, his spirit confused and mournful, his gaze fixed on Odysseus. His was the kind of ghost you'd expect to haunt a clumsy ladder, not the underworld. Odysseus, Elpenor's voice was a reedy whisper, barely audible over the din of the other spirits. Remember me, my lord. Do not leave me unwept and unburied, lest I become a cause of divine wrath for you. When you return to Circe's island, burn my body with all my armor, and heap a barrel for me by the gray sea, to tell my story to future men, and plant upon the barrel the oar I rowed with when I was alive. Odysseus, deeply moved, promised to fulfill his request. It was a stark reminder that even in death, the smallest, most unfortunate of men still craved proper respect and remembrance. It's a good lesson, really. Don't forget the little guy, even if he did die trying to navigate a roof after too much wine. Proper burial rites were utterly crucial in ancient Greek belief. Without them, a soul could not truly rest, doomed to wander. As Elpenor's shade drifted away, a new figure approached the trench, one clearly of greater importance. It was Tiresias of Thebes, the blind prophet, his form regal and solemn. He carried a golden staff, and his blind eyes, though sightless in life, seemed to possess a deeper internal vision. He was the main attraction, the reason for this whole ghastly trip. Hold back your sword, son of Laertes. Tiresias' voice was clear, resonant, cutting through the spectral murmur. Let me drink the blood, that I may speak truth to you. Odysseus lowered his sword, allowing the prophet to lean over the trench and drink deeply from the fresh blood. As he did, his spectral form seemed to gain a momentary solidity, his voice gaining strength. You seek a sweet return, Odysseus, Tiresias began, his blind gaze fixed on some distant point in the ethereal gloom. But a god will make it hard for you. Poseidon, the earthshaker, harbors wrath in his heart, for you blinded his dear son, the cyclopes. Yet, even so, you may reach home, if you restrain your heart and your companions, when your ship reaches the island of Thrinacia, where you will find the cattle and fat flocks of Helios, the sun god. Do not touch them. Do not harm them. Not a single one. If you do, I foretell the destruction of your ship and the death of all your men. And even if you escape, you will return home late, in sore distress, with all your comrades lost on a ship not your own, and find trouble in your house. This was heavy. All his comrades lost, on a ship not his own, in trouble at home. The prophecy was a punch to the gut, but Tiresias wasn't done. And when you have dealt with the suitors who devour your livelihood, the prophet continued, you must take a well-made oar and journey inland until you reach a place where men know nothing of the sea, who do not mix salt with their food, and who know nothing of ships or of red-cheeked oars. When a traveler meets you and says, what is that winnowing fan upon your shoulder? Then you must plant your oar in the earth, offer sacrifice to Poseidon, and then return home and make sacred offerings to all the gods. Only then will a gentle death come to you from the sea, a death that will gently take you in old age with your people prosperous around you. A winnowing fan. That was a rather specific and slightly quirky detail for a prophecy, wasn't it? It basically meant he had to find a truly landlocked spot, far from any sailors, to appease Poseidon once and for all. It was an epilogue to his epic, a final journey of penance. And then, a peaceful death. After all this, sounded almost too good to be true. With Tiresias' words echoing in the spectral gloom, Odysseus stepped aside, making way for the next shade. And then he saw her, his own mother, Anticlea, who had died of grief during his long absence. He hadn't known she was dead. The shock, the pain, was immense. He fought back tears, his hand clenching the hilt of his sword, remembering Tiresias' instruction that he must not allow her to drink the blood until he had finished with the prophet. It was a cruel test to see his beloved mother's spirit and not be able to offer her comfort. Now he let her approach the trench, She drank, her form solidified, her eyes gaining a flicker of recognition. "My son," she whispered, her voice filled with sorrow and love. "How did you come here, still living, to this land of gloom? You not yet returned to Ithaca?" Odysseus explained his harrowing journey. The war, the monsters, the storms. Then he asked, his voice raw, "Tell me, mother, how did you die? And how are my wife and son? Is my kingdom safe?" Anticlea recounted the news from Ithaca. Penelope, his faithful wife, still waited, still wept, her loom a symbol of her enduring loyalty. Telemachus, their son, had grown to manhood and was bravely trying to protect their household. But the suitors, the hundreds of arrogant, greedy noblemen who had invaded their palace, devouring their wealth, pressing Penelope to choose a new husband. This was the trouble in his house, Tiresias had mentioned. His father, Laertes, was living a life of mournful seclusion, heartbroken by his son's long absence. It was a picture of a home under siege, suffering under the weight of his protracted absence. The thought of those leeches, those uninvited guests, was enough to reignite the fire in his belly. Odysseus yearned to embrace his mother, to hold her close, but his hands passed through her like smoke. It was a heartbreaking realization of the true nature of death, of the impassable chasm between the living and the dead. The scholarly debate here is whether this scene is meant to highlight Odysseus's profound grief or the strict, unyielding laws of the underworld. Probably both. After his mother, a procession of famous women from Greek myth approached, each desiring to drink the blood and tell her story. You see the shades of Tyro, Antiope, Alcmene, Heracles' mother, Epicace, Oedipus's mother. Though Homer often glosses over that part. Leda, Iphimedia, Phaedra, Procris, Ariadne, and many more. It was a veritable who's who of tragic heroines and legendary beauties, a VIP section of the deceased. Odysseus, ever the curious, listened to their brief, often sorrowful tales, learning of their fates and their lineage. This part of the epic might feel a bit like a medieval catalog of women, a scholarly laundry list of mythical figures designed to show off Homer's encyclopedic knowledge, or perhaps just a way to pad out the word count in epic poetry. Then came the heroes, the great warriors he had fought alongside at Troy. The sight of Agamemnon, the once mighty king of Mycenae, was a somber one. His shade approached, still lamenting his treacherous death at the hands of his wife, Clytemnestra, and her lover, Aestus. He spoke of betrayal, of the unbearable shame of dying not in glorious battle, but in his own home, murdered by his queen. "Beware, Odysseus," Agamemnon warned, his voice bitter, a ghostly echo of his former authority. "Never be too kind to your wife, nor show her all the counsel you know. Only tell her so much, but keep the rest hidden, for women are no longer trustworthy. Do not land openly in your own country, but make a secret approach, for there is no trusting even your own wife." It was a chilling warning, dripping with his own personal trauma. You could almost feel the phantom dagger still lodged in his back. Agamemnon's advice, coming from a man who literally married his cousin. Clytemnestra was Helen's sister, making them Agamemnon and Menelaus's wives, respectively. A rather neat, if complicated, family arrangement. Certainly added a layer of complexity to the concept of trust, didn't it? It also serves to heighten Odysseus's anxiety about Penelope, though we, the audience, know she remains steadfast. Next, the magnificent Achilles, the greatest of all Greek warriors, strode forward, his spirit radiating a residual pride. Odysseus tried to comfort him, reminding him of his glory, his eternal fame in the land of the living. But Achilles, surprisingly, was not comforted by tales of his earthly glory. "Do not speak to me of death, glorious Odysseus," he said, his voice laced with profound weariness. "I would rather be a serf on earth, slaving for some landless man, than be king over all the perished dead." It was a stark, sobering statement, a direct counterpoint to the Homeric ideal of glorious death. Even for Achilles, eternal fame meant little compared to the simple joys of life. He did, however, express keen interest in his son, Neoptolemus, asking if he had fought bravely at Troy. Odysseus, proud of the young man, recounted Neoptolemus's courage, bringing a faint, proud gleam to Achilles' spectral eyes. Then came Ajax, the towering warrior, still sullen, still furious. He refused to speak to Odysseus, even after Odysseus tried to placate him, apologizing for the decision that awarded Achilles' arms to Odysseus, not to him, a slight that drove Ajax to madness and suicide. Ajax's silent, stiff-necked resentment was a powerful reminder of how deeply human pride and grudges could endure, even beyond the grave. You could almost hear the cosmic unfriend button being pressed. As Odysseus finished speaking with the heroes, the air grew thick with a new kind of dread. He began to perceive the figures of those who suffered eternal punishment in Hades, those who had offended the gods in the most grievous ways. You see Tantalus standing in a pool of water that receded whenever he tried to drink, and beneath branches laden with fruit that blew away when he reached for them. Forever hungry, forever thirsty, just out of reach, living or, well, dead, embodiment of frustration. Then there was Sisyphus, forever pushing a massive boulder up a hill, only for it to roll back down just as he neared the top. An eternal workout, worse than any CrossFit regimen. And Titus stretched out across 9 acres, 2 vultures perpetually tearing at his liver, a gruesome, unending torment. These were the truly cursed, their punishments a vivid, chilling sermon on divine retribution. The sheer volume of the dead, the incessant whispers, the unceasing sorrow of the place began to overwhelm Odysseus. He felt a sudden, desperate urge to flee, to escape this kingdom of shadows, before he, too, became part of its desolate landscape. He had seen enough. He had heard enough. He had what he came for. Odysseus' grim prophecy in the path home. With a final, terrified glance at the endless throng of shades, Odysseus rushed back to his ship, urging his men to cast off the stern cables and push out into the dark river. The men, equally terrified, didn't need to be told twice. They strained at the oars, their muscles burning, desperate to escape the clammy grasp of the underworld. They rowed with frantic speed, feeling the currents of the ocean stream pulling them away from the sunless land. The spectral whispers faded behind them, replaced by the familiar sound of the sea. As they emerged from the perpetual gloom, the first rays of the sun seemed incredibly bright, almost blindingly glorious. The fresh air filled their lungs, a sweet, tangible relief after the suffocating atmosphere of the dead. They had made it. They were alive. They had literally gone to hell and back. But the ordeal was not over. They still had a promise to keep. Odysseus steered the ship back towards Circe's island to fulfill Elpenor's dying wish. It was the least they could do for the poor, clumsy soul. They landed back on the familiar shores of the lushness of the island, a welcome contrast to the bleakness they'd just endured. The first order of business was Elpenor. They found his unburied body, collected wood, and with heavy hearts, performed the proper funeral rites. They built a pyre, burned his body with his armor, and heaped a barrow for him by the gray sea, a small mound of earth as a monument to his short and glorious life. And then, as he had requested, they planted his oar on top, a humble but enduring marker. It was a solemn, quiet moment, a final farewell to a forgotten comrade, a small act of closure amidst the chaos of their journey. As the sun rose higher, casting long shadows across the island, Circe herself appeared, radiant and beautiful, bringing them bread, meat, and sweet wine. She greeted them warmly, though her eyes held a knowing gaze, aware of the grim journey they had just undertaken. "Wretched men," she said, her voice gentle, "who have gone alive to the house of Hades. You will die twice, while other men die only once. But now, eat and drink, and stay here for the day. Tomorrow you will set sail, and I will tell you of the dangers that still lie ahead, the trials you must face before you can reach home. And so, for one more day, they rested on Circe's island, trying to digest not just the food, but the horrifying truths they had learned in the land of the dead. The weight of Tiresias' prophecy lay heavily on Odysseus' mind. The fate of his comrades, the trouble in his house, the need for one more journey after all this. It was a lot to unpack, especially on an empty stomach. That night, as the stars began to prickle the inky sky, Circe pulled Odysseus aside. She knew the path ahead. She knew the perils. She was about to impart the final, crucial warnings, the instructions that would literally make or break his journey home. This was the hero's briefing, the ultimate travel advisory for a road trip filled with mythological monsters. First, she began, her voice low and serious. You will come to the sirens. They are creatures who sit in a meadow, surrounded by the rotting bones of men, enchanting all who draw near with their beautiful, irresistible song. If any man listens, he will never see his home again. He will be drawn to them and perish. She paused, allowing the gravity of her words to sink in. You shivered, imagining a song so beautiful it could kill. To pass them safely, you must plug your men's ears with softened beeswax. But if you yourself wish to hear their song, and I know your curious heart, Odysseus, you must be tied to the mast of your ship, hand and foot, so tightly that you cannot move. And if you beg your men to release you, they must only tie you tighter. A fascinating psychological experiment, wasn't it? It's the ultimate test of willpower against temptation. Beyond the sirens, Circe continued, there are two paths, and both are fraught with danger. You will have to choose. One path leads between two clashing rocks, the Plankte, which only one ship, the Argo, has ever passed safely. It is a path of certain destruction for any other vessel. Do not take it. The other path, she warned, her voice growing even more ominous, lies between two cliffs. On one side dwells Scylla, a monstrous creature of nightmare. She has 12 legs, 6 long, snaky necks, and at the end of each neck, a terrible head with triple rows of fangs. Kata, she snatches men from passing ships, 6 at a time, and devours them. Canster, there is no defense. You cannot fight her, you can only flee. And on the other side, just a stone's throw away, is Charybdis, who thrice a day sucks down the black water of the sea, and thrice a day spits it out again. If you are caught in her whirlpool, your ship will be utterly destroyed, swallowed whole. Lie in Charybdis, the ultimate rock and a hard place. It is better, Circe advised, to hug Scylla's cliff and lose 6 men than to lose your entire ship and all your crew to Charybdis. A grim calculus, isn't it? Sacrificing some to save the rest. It's like picking your poison, but with monster fangs in a giant whirlpool. She outlined the route, the tricky navigation, the precise moment to pull away from Charybdis and steer toward Scylla. She told him of the narrow passage, the spray that would blind them, the roar of the water. It was a detailed, terrifying map of the perils ahead. And then Circe delivered the final, most crucial warning, echoing Tiresias' prophecy. Beyond these monsters, she said, you will reach the island of Therinicha. There you will find the sacred cattle of Helios. They are immortal and never breed nor die. Do not harm them, Odysseus. Do not touch them. If you do, destruction will come upon your ship and all your men, as Tiresias foretold. And even if you escape, you will return home late and in sorrow. The same warning, twice. It hammered home the absolute, non-negotiable nature of this taboo. The cattle of the sun god, a simple herd of cows, yet potentially the ultimate undoing of their entire journey. It seemed almost mundane compared to literal sea monsters and whirlpools, but the reiteration from 2 different prophetic sources lent it an ominous weight. With these chilling instructions, Circe bid Odysseus farewell. He returned to his men, his mind reeling with the enormity of the tasks ahead. He had a plan, yes, but it was a plan that involved certain death for some and overwhelming temptation for all. The morning light, usually a source of comfort, now seemed to highlight the grim path that lay before them. The gentle zephyr, which would normally guide them, felt like a mocking whisper. They were heading into the heart of the storm, guided by prophecies and fear, knowing that even if they survived, the price would be immense. The journey was not just long, it was a gauntlet of choices. Each one weighted with the lives of his dwindling crew. The journey was not just long, it was a gauntlet of choices. Each one weighted with the lives of his dwindling crew. Deceived the morning after Circe's chilling prophecy, the air on Ia felt different. The lush greenery, the comfortable palace, the endless feasts, it all seemed like a cruel mirage now, a temporary reprieve before the inevitable. The men, their faces etched with a weary mixture of dread and resignation, hauled supplies aboard. They knew the next leg of their voyage wasn't just dangerous, it was mythically, proverbially, hellishly dangerous. Odysseus, his mind buzzing with Circe's precise, terrifying instructions, ordered the ship made ready. First, the sirens. He gathered his men, their eyes wide and nervous. "Cecilia has warned me of the sirens," he began, his voice grim. "They will destroy us with their song. We must pass them safely." He didn't mention the part about him wanting to hear the song. Some things were best kept to himself, even from loyal crew. You notice how carefully he chooses his words, already navigating the treacherous waters of morale. He took a large cake of beeswax, softened it in the warmth of the sun, and kneaded it until it was pliable. Then, piece by piece, he plugged the ears of every single man on board. You watch as they fumble, their expressions a mix of confusion and trust, unable to hear anything but a dull hum. When they were all deaf to the outside world, they turned to Odysseus, looking for their instructions. "Now, tie me to the mast," he mouthed, gesturing vehemently. "Bind me, hand and foot. If I beg you to release me, if I plead and scream, tie me tighter. Do not, under any circumstances, release me until we are well past their island." They understood, with grim determination, two of the strongest men, Perimedes and Eurylochus, who, despite his earlier fear, seemed to understand the stakes, lashed him to the mast with ropes, so tightly he couldn't even twitch a muscle. He was a prisoner on his own ship, a living experiment in temptation. You can almost see the psychological papers being written about this moment thousands of years later. The hero's willpower, a study in self-imposed restraint. The ship pushed off from Ia, a brisk, favorable wind filling their sails. Soon, the island of the sirens came into view. It was deceptively beautiful, a verdant green rising from the sea. But as you drew closer, you saw it, the meadow Circe had spoken of, strewn with the bleached bones of men, their skin still clinging to some, rotting in the sun. It was a ghastly charnel house, a monument to irresistible temptation. Then you feel it, a vibration in the air, not through your ears, but through the deck, through your bones. The song, even with your ears sealed with wax, you can sense its power, its insidious beauty. It's like a melody played directly on your soul, whispering promises of knowledge, of home, of everything you desire. It's a tune so enchanting, so utterly captivating, that it bypasses all logic, all reason. Odysseus, tied to the mast, his face straining, begins to writhe. His eyes, wide with a desperate yearning, roll back in his head. He thrashes, struggling against the ropes, his muscles bulging, lets out guttural cries, pleading with his men, gesturing wildly for them to untie him. The song is clearly an agony of temptation for him, a battle of his legendary will against a primal, hypnotic force. But the men, deafened, row on, their faces grim, seeing only their leaders struggle, hearing only the rhythmic splash of their oars. When Odysseus's pleas grow more frantic, Perimedes and Eurylochus, remembering his instructions, rush forward and tie him even tighter, lashing more ropes around his already straining body. It's a surreal tableau. The hero, the wisest of them all, reduced to a desperate, silenced struggle against an unseen enemy, his life dependent on the deafness of his comrades. Slowly, agonizingly, the ship pulls away from the Sirens' island. The vibration in the air lessens. The phantom melody fades. The island recedes into the distance. Odysseus' struggles subside. He slumps against the mast, exhausted, his face pale, but his eyes clear. You watch as the men untie him, gently at first, then more quickly once he nods his assent. Odysseus, still reeling from the song's power, goes to each man, removing the beeswax from their ears. The sudden return of sound, the lapping of waves, the creak of timbers, feels deafening after the silence. The men are shaken, but safe. One peril overcome, but there was no time to rest. Circe's grim itinerary continued. Beyond the Sirens, Odysseus declared, his voice still hoarse, lies a choice. Two paths. One, certain death. The other, loss. He hesitated, his eyes meeting each man's. He knew he had to choose Scylla, that he would lose 6 men. He knew he couldn't tell them, not yet. The sheer terror would make them abandon their oars, paralyze them. Sometimes, a leader has to carry the heaviest burden of knowledge alone. It's a classic ethical dilemma, isn't it? To lie for the greater good, or to tell a truth that might lead to chaos. Soon, the chilling sounds began. Ahead, 2 monstrous cliffs loomed, shrouded in mist. From one side, a deep, guttural roar, a sucking sound that made your stomach churn. That was Charybdis, inhaling the sea. From the other, a high-pitched, incessant yelp, like a pack of savage dogs. It was Scylla. The air was filled with spray, a fine, cold mist that tasted of salt and fear. Odysseus ordered the men to row towards Scylla's side, though he aimed for the very edge of her reach, hoping to sneak past. He warned them to stay focused, to row with all their might. He deliberately avoided mentioning her heads, her snaky necks, the horror that awaited them. He stood at the prow, sword drawn, futilely preparing to fight a monster he knew was invincible. The ship plunged into the narrow strait, buffeted by cross currents. The roar of Charybdis was deafening, a monstrous gurgle as she sucked down the black water, revealing the rocky seabed. Then a violent explosion as she vomited it back out. The ship pitched wildly, threatening to be caught in the whirlpool's maw. You cling to the ropes, your knuckles white, your eyes fixed on the churning water. Then, from the darkness of Scylla's cave, it happened. The barking grew louder, closer. You hear the splash, the sickening thud of her heads striking the ship. 6 monstrous necks, each with a triple row of teeth, shot out from the cliff face. With terrifying speed, they snatched 6 men from the deck. Their screams cut short, swallowed by the monster's gaping maws. You watch in frozen horror as your comrades, men you'd sailed with for years, men who'd survived Troy, the Cyclopes, the Lastrygonians, are lifted, struggling, into the air, ripped apart and devoured. It's a scene of unimaginable brutality, a primal nightmare unfolding before your very eyes. Odysseus, despite his readiness, despite his sword, was helpless. He couldn't fight her. He could only watch as his crew was eaten, consumed by a force beyond his control. It was the most piteous sight he'd ever seen, Homer tells us. The ship, lighter by 6 souls, shot forward, escaping the immediate clutches of both monsters. The men, those who remained, were weeping openly, their faces pale with shock and grief. The deck was stained with blood, a gruesome reminder of their loss. They had survived, but at a terrible, unbargainable cost, with the horrors of Scylla and Charybdis behind them. The immediate, soul-crushing terror subsided, replaced by a lingering, dull ache of loss. The sun, which seemed to be playing cruel games with their emotions, finally broke through the clouds, bathing the world in a warm, deceptively peaceful glow. Ahead, on the horizon, appeared a new island. This was Tyrannica, the island of Helios, the sun god, and on it, in lush pastures, grazed the beautiful, immortal cattle and fat flocks of the god. They were magnificent beasts, perfectly formed, with coats that shimmered like gold in the sunlight, and horns that gleamed like polished bronze. They were a sight of immense beauty, utterly pristine, unlike any mortal cattle. Odysseus, remembering both Tiresias's and Circe's dire warnings, felt a cold dread settle in his stomach. He gathered his remaining men, their numbers now heartbreakingly few. "Listen to me, comrades," he implored, his voice firm. Circe and Tiresias, the blind prophet, both warned us of this place. "Whatever you do, do not touch the cattle of Helios. They are sacred. If we harm them, destruction will fall upon us." The men, still shaken by Scylla, seemed to agree. Their immediate concern was survival, not transgression. They beached the ship in a quiet cove, far from the sacred pastures, and Odysseus made them swear a solemn oath. They would not touch the cattle. They would subsist on the provisions Circe had given them. For a time, they kept their promise. But then, as if the gods were actively conspiring against them, a furious storm descended upon them. Day after day, for an entire month, the south wind blew relentlessly, trapping them on the island. They couldn't put to sea. The waves were too high, the winds too fierce. Their meager provisions dwindled, then vanished. Hunger, that insidious, primal enemy, began to set in. Their bellies growled, their strength waned. They tried fishing, but the angry sea yielded nothing. They hunted, but the island offered no game. They were starving, slowly but surely, trapped by the elements. One day, with the storm still raging and hunger gnawing at his very bones, Odysseus, in a moment of desperate prayer, decided to seek the gods' favor alone. He walked inland, away from his men, to find a sheltered spot to pray to the Olympians, hoping for a sign, for mercy, for a way out. He washed his hands, spread out his cloak, and began to pray. But the gods, it seemed, had other plans. As he prayed, a deep, heavy sleep, sent by the deities themselves, fell upon him. Ah, divine intervention. The perfect way to engineer a plot twist and absolve the hero of immediate responsibility. While Odysseus was deep in his divinely induced slumber, Eurylochus, that cautious but ultimately pragmatic voice, saw his chance. He gathered the starving men. "Listen to me, comrades," he urged, his voice low and desperate. "You are dying of hunger, a miserable death. Would it not be better to try to appease the gods by feasting on Helios's cattle and face their wrath later? A swift death by divine lightning is better than a slow, agonizing starvation. Let us make a sacrifice, promise to build a grand temple to Helios when we return home, and take our chances." The men, their eyes hollow with hunger, swayed by Eurylochus's desperate logic, agreed. One by one, they dragged the finest, fattest cattle from Helios's herd down to the beach. They slaughtered them, flaying their hides, preparing them for a feast. But the moment the blood of the sacred cattle touched the earth, omens began. The hides of the slaughtered cattle began to crawl, as if alive. The raw meat on the spits began to low, a mournful, ghostly sound, like cattle still alive, like a supernatural moo from the grave. It was a horrifying, undeniable sign of divine displeasure, enough to make even the most hardened sailor's blood run cold. Imagine your steak mooing at you. Definitely takes away the appetite, right? Odysseus awoke from his sleep, the scent of roasting meat thick in the air. He knew instantly. He groaned, his heart sinking, a terrible premonition washing over him. He rushed back to the beach, and the sight that greeted him confirmed his worst fears. His men, gorging themselves, surrounded by the mooing meat and crawling hides. "Fools," he cried, his voice breaking. "You have doomed us all." Too late. The deed was done. Helios, high in the heavens, enraged by the sacrilege, heard the lowing of his slaughtered cattle. He ascended to Olympus, furious, to complain to Zeus. "Father Zeus," he thundered, "and you, other blessed gods, who live forever, punish these men who have insolently slaughtered my cattle. If they do not pay me just atonement for my cattle, I will go down to Hades and shine among the dead." Zeus, ever the pragmatist when faced with a god's tantrum, assured Helios. "Rest content, Helios," he rumbled. "I will strike their ship with a blinding bolt in the middle of the wind-dark sea, shattering it to bits." For 6 more days, the men feasted on the sacred cattle, ignoring the ominous signs, perhaps in a desperate attempt to ignore their impending doom. On the 7th day, the storm finally abated, and they put to sea, sailing away from Thrinacia, their bellies full, but their fates sealed. They had not sailed far when the sky turned an ominous, bruised purple. Dark clouds gathered, swiftly blotting out the sun. The air grew heavy, pregnant with a terrifying stillness. Then the storm broke. Not just a storm, but a cataclysm. Zeus unleashed his fury. A monstrous squall struck the ship, tearing away the mast, ripping the sails to shreds. The steering oar snapped. Then a lightning bolt, a fiery spear from the heavens, struck the ship square in the middle. The smell of burning timber, the hiss of steam, and the screams of his men filled the air. The ship spun, shattered, and disintegrated, sending splinters and drowning men into the churning waves. You watch in horror as your last few comrades, men who had endured so much, are tossed into the furious sea, their bodies swallowed by the raging depths. They surface briefly, then vanish, consumed by the wrath of Zeus. Odysseus, miraculously, was spared the direct strike. Kay clung desperately to a piece of the keel and the mast, which remained lashed together. Kay was alone now, utterly alone, adrift in the vast, unforgiving ocean. No ship, no men, nothing but the splintered wreckage of his dreams. Tiresias' prophecy had come true. All his comrades lost on a ship not his own. He drifted for 9 days and 9 nights, battered by waves, roasted by the sun, chilled by the night, clinging to his makeshift raft. Hunger and thirst were his constant companions, despair his shadow. On the 10th day, he found himself, to his utter horror, drifting back towards the very place he had escaped, the Strait of Scylla and Charybdis. He watched in terror as Charybdis, with a monstrous roar, sucked down the water of the sea again, creating a terrifying whirlpool directly beneath him. He knew he would be swallowed whole, in a desperate, split-second decision. Just as his makeshift raft was about to be dragged into the vortex, he leapt. He grabbed onto the branches of a massive fig tree that grew over Charybdis' maw, clinging with all his might, his hands raw, his body dangling over the abyss. He hung there, suspended between life and oblivion for what felt like an eternity, waiting for Charybdis to vomit up the wreckage of his raft. The hours crawled by. Finally, at midday, the mast and keel shot up from the depths. Odysseus, summoning his last reserves of strength, let go of the tree, plunging down onto his makeshift craft, landing with a sickening thud. He quickly untied the mast and keel, straddled them, and began to paddle with his hands, desperately rowing away from the monstrous whirlpool. He drifted once more, for 7 more days and 7 more nights, pushed by winds that seemed to have no destination. Utterly alone, delirious with hunger and exhaustion, he finally washed ashore on a new land. It was an island, lush and beautiful, filled with caves and forests, bathed in eternal spring. You observe him, a pathetic, broken figure, dragged onto the soft sand by the waves. He is utterly spent, near death. Calypso, a goddess of stunning beauty, with long, flowing hair and eyes like the sea itself, discovers him. She is drawn to him, this shipwrecked, weary mortal. She brings him to her magnificent cave, feeds him ambrosia and nectar, the food and drink of the gods, and nurses him back to health. Calypso is captivated by Odysseus, by his strength, his intelligence, his tales of Troy, and his harrowing journey. She offers him immortality. Stay with me, Odysseus, she pleads, her voice like a siren's song, but without the treachery. Be my husband, okay? You will never die, never grow old, okay? You will live here with me in eternal bliss, away from the sorrows of the mortal world. It's an offer most men would leap at. Immortality, eternal youth, a life of luxury with a gorgeous goddess. No more worries, no more pain, no more death. But Odysseus, ever the man of purpose, the man tethered to his home, refuses. He longs for Penelope, for Telemachus, for the rocky shores of Ithaca. He sits by the shore, day after day, for 7 long, agonizing years, gazing out at the wind-dark sea, his heart aching for home. He weeps, his tears mingling with the salt spray. He is a prisoner, albeit a luxurious one, of a goddess's love. She can keep him here, but she cannot force him to love her back, cannot make him forget his mortal life. He spends his days helping Calypso around her island, feigning contentment, but every night he returns to the shore, sitting on the rocks, staring at the endless horizon, his eyes red with weeping, his soul yearning for release. It's a melancholy existence, a golden cage. He misses the creak of his ship, the salty air of his homeland, the sound of Penelope's loom. Meanwhile, back on Olympus, the gods are having a meeting. Athena, always Odysseus' champion, can no longer bear his suffering. She pleads with her father, Zeus. Father, she urges, her voice filled with pity, why do you forget Odysseus? He suffers on a lonely island, held captive by Calypso, longing to return home. Zeus, stirred by Athena's plea, and perhaps tired of Calypso's possessiveness, agrees. He sends Hermes, the swift messenger, to Aegygia with a divine decree. Calypso must release Odysseus. Hermes, golden-sandaled and staff in hand, flies across the sea, swift as a thought. He finds Calypso in her cave, weaving at her loom, the scent of cedar and cypress filling the air. He delivers Zeus's stern message. Calypso is furious. You gods, she rages, you are so jealous. You begrudge a goddess finding joy with a mortal man. But I must obey. I will let him go. She finds Odysseus sitting by the shore, as always, weeping. She approaches him, her beautiful face a mask of sorrow. Wretched man, she says, do not grieve any longer. I will let you go. Odysseus, cautious, demands an oath. Swear to me, goddess, that you mean me no harm. Calypso, with a sigh, swears the solemn oath. For 4 days, Odysseus toils, felling trees, shaping timbers, building a sturdy raft with the tools Calypso provides. She assists him, guiding him, bringing him food and drink. It's a strange collaboration, prisoner and captor, working together for his freedom. On the 5th day, the raft is complete. Calypso gives him provisions, fresh water, and a favorable wind. Odysseus pushes off from Ogygia, leaving behind the beautiful island and the goddess who had offered him immortality. He is alone again, on a fragile raft, his only companion, the vast, indifferent sea. But this time, his spirit is lighter. He is truly free, truly on his way home, or so he hopes. The journey, however, is far from over. His troubles are just beginning to escalate, and the divine interventions are only going to get more personal. He sailed for 17 days and nights, a tiny speck on a boundless canvas of deep blue, the steady, favorable wind granted by Calypso, a benevolent hand at his back. The days were warm, the nights filled with a galaxy of stars that felt impartially close, each one a tiny pinprick of hope in the vast cosmic loom. Odysseus, alone but no longer despairing, steered his sturdy, humble raft, his heart focused on the distant, invisible pool of Ithaca. I saw constellations, he knew, familiar guides that pointed towards home, and, for the first time in years, a fragile, almost forgotten sense of calm settled over him. This was it, the final leg. He was almost there. Then, on the 18th day, just as the distant, shadowy mountains of Scheria, the land of the Phaeacians, began to emerge on the horizon, the universe decided it wasn't done with him. Poseidon, the earthshaker, had been off in his beloved Ethiopia, feasting with his loyal followers, the blameless Ethiopians, who, honestly, probably just had better shrimp than the Greeks. He was returning home, soaring across the sea in his golden chariot drawn by swift, scaly horses, when his single-minded gaze fell upon a familiar figure, Odysseus, sailing freely, without suffering. A guttural roar ripped through the heavens, making the very waves tremble. Odysseus, Poseidon thundered, his voice a tidal wave of pure, concentrated fury. So, the gods have changed their minds about you while I was away. They wish you to reach home. But you shall have a bitter voyage yet. You feel the air crackle, the sudden shift from placid calm to murderous intent. The sky, which moments before had been a brilliant azure, turned an ominous, bruised purple, then black. Poseidon gathered all the winds, the north, the south, the east, and hurled them at the tiny raft. Hurricanes exploded from the heavens, churning the sea into a frothing, chaotic maelstrom. Waves, the size of mountains, rose up and crashed down with thunderous force, tearing at the raft, threatening to swallow it whole. Odysseus, his face a mask of grim resolve, fought desperately, bracing against the onslaught, his hands raw from clinging to the timber. He was a veteran of storms, but this was different. This wasn't just weather. This was divine, personal, all-consuming wrath. You could almost feel Poseidon's icy glare burning through the storm clouds. A monstrous wave, higher than any other, broke over the raft, smashing it to splinters. The mast snapped, the planks scattered, and Odysseus was plunged into the churning, icy depths, swallowed by the vengeful sea. I surfaced, gasping, spitting salt water, clinging to a single, battered plank, the last vestige of his hopes. He was alone again, adrift in a universe determined to drown him. The prophecy of Tiresias echoed. All his comrades lost, on a ship not his own. Well, now he had no ship at all. Just as despair threatened to consume him, a moment of unexpected divine grace broke through the chaos. A beautiful figure, with the shimmering form of a seabird, flew towards him. It was Ino, daughter of Cadmus, now a goddess, known as Leucadia. She pitied Odysseus, this suffering mortal. She landed on his plank, her voice, though gentle, cutting through the roar of the storm. "Wretched man," she said, her eyes filled with compassion, "why does Poseidon rage against you so? Cast off your clothes, leave your raft to the winds, and swim. Take this veil, bind it around your breast. It is immortal, and it will protect you from harm and keep you from drowning. When you reach land, cast it back into the sea, without looking back." Odysseus, ever cautious, hesitated. Was this another trap? A trick from a vengeful god? He'd seen too much trickery. "No, I will not cast off my clothes," he shouted back over the gale. "I will cling to this timber while it holds together. If Poseidon shatters it, then I will swim." His skepticism was almost endearing at this point, wasn't it? Even when offered a literal life preserver by a goddess, he still second guesses. A Poseidon, not one for patience, sent another colossal wave. It shattered the plank to which Odysseus clung, scattering the remaining pieces. Now, Odysseus had no choice. He stripped off his storm-soaked clothes, bound the shimmering ethereal veil around his chest, and plunged into the sea. He was truly naked before the elements, relying solely on a goddess's mercy and his own immense strength. He swam. For 2 days and 2 nights, he battled the colossal waves, the relentless currents, the icy bite of the ocean. He was buffeted, tossed, slammed against invisible walls of water. Tick. His muscles screamed, his lungs burned, and despair threatened to drag him down. You can feel the salt drying on your skin, the chafing of the veil, the endless, soul-crushing effort of simply staying afloat. He was swimming, but it was more like struggling, surviving by sheer, stubborn force of will, fueled by the memory of Ithaca, Penelope, Telemachus. On the third day, as dawn broke, he finally saw it clearly. Land. The island of Scyria, rising from the mist. It looked like salvation. But then, as he drew closer, he saw the truth. A sheer, rocky coastline, jagged cliffs, and no discernible landing place. The waves crashed against the rocks with murderous force, threatening to dash him to pieces. He was caught between the crushing sea and the impenetrable land. Alas, he groaned, his voice hoarse. What more does Zeus intend for me? There is no landing here, only jagged rocks and a raging surf. Just as he was about to be flung against the cliffs, Athena, always his steadfast champion, intervened once more. She inspired him, showing him a narrow river mouth, a calmer stretch of water amidst the chaos. With a final, desperate surge of strength, he swam towards it, crawling, dragging himself, his body battered and bleeding onto the soft, muddy bank. He collapsed, utterly spent, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. He had cheated death yet again. He lay there, gasping, tasting mud and exhaustion. The first thing he did, as Ino had commanded, was to untie the immortal veil and cast it back into the river. It shimmered briefly, then vanished beneath the waves, a silent acknowledgement of divine aid. He was truly alone again, naked and vulnerable, but alive. He found shelter under a thick olive bush, a dual-rooted tree that offered perfect concealment. He gathered a pile of dry leaves, burrowed into them like an animal, and finally, after days of battling the sea, surrendered to a deep, profound, and utterly necessary sleep. It was the sleep of the truly exhausted, the kind where you lose all sense of time, where dreams are a luxury and oblivion is a blessing. He slept for a full day and a night. The sun rose and set, painting the sky with hues he didn't see. He heard no birds, no rustling leaves, just the blessed silence of unconsciousness. The next morning, as the sun began to warm the ducous leaves, a young woman, radiant as a goddess herself, was stirring in the nearby city of the Phaeacians. This was Nausicaa, the beautiful, spirited daughter of King Alcinous. Athena, ever the matchmaker and plot facilitator, had visited Nausicaa in a dream, urging her to go to the river and wash her family's clothes, hinting that her marriage day was near. A rather elaborate divine ruse to get laundry done, but it worked. Nausicaa, with her maids, drove a mule cart laden with dirty clothes down to the river. They washed the clothes in the flowing water, spreading them out to dry on the pebbled shore. When their work was done, they ate their lunch, then decided to play a game of ball, their joyful shouts echoing across the quiet landscape. You watched them, these innocents, oblivious to the battered, naked hero sleeping nearby. It was a misplaced throw, a wild toss of the ball that awakened Odysseus. The ball splashed near where he slept, and the maiden's joyful screams were sharp enough to cut through his deep slumber. He stirred, disoriented, his mind slowly returning to the harsh reality of his situation. He was naked, surrounded by strangers, and vulnerable. He broke off a leafy branch from his olive bush, holding it before him for modesty, like a very sad fig leaf. He emerged from the thicket, a terrifying sight to the young women. A man, encrusted with salt, his face grim, his body bruised and battered, like a wild beast emerging from the woods. The maids shrieked and scattered, running in all directions, their screams a fresh wave of panic. Only Nausicaa stood firm. Athena had given her courage, planted a seed of calm amidst the terror. As she gazed at Odysseus, pity mingling with awe. Odysseus, cautious but desperate, knew he had to speak. He couldn't afford to offend. "I beg of you, queen," he began, his voice hoarse but steady, his words flowing with practiced charm. "Are you a goddess or a mortal? If you're a goddess, you must be Artemis by your beauty and noble bearing. But if you are mortal, thrice blessed are your father and mother, and thrice blessed your brothers. And most blessed of all is the man who will lead you to his home as his bride. He spun a tale of his shipwreck, his suffering, appealing to her pity and to the Greek values of Cynia, hospitality toward strangers. Nausicaa, impressed by his respectful address and his obvious nobility despite his wretched state, felt pity for him. "Stranger," she replied, her voice gentle, "since you have come to our land, you shall not lack for clothing, nor anything else that is fitting for a supplicant. We are Phaeacians, and we welcome all strangers, for we are dear to the gods." She called her maids, rebuking them for their fear. They brought Odysseus a tunic and cloak and olive oil to wash himself in the river. Athena, unseen, made him even more handsome, taller and more robust, with flowing hair, a truly divine makeover. When he emerged, clothed and transformed, Nausicaa looked at him with renewed admiration. "He is indeed like a god," she whispered to her maids. She then gave him instructions for reaching the city. "Follow my cart," she advised, "but do not walk immediately behind it. Our people are gossips, and they might speak ill if they see me bringing a stranger home. Wait outside my father's palace until you see me and my mother enter. Then go directly inside and find my mother, Arete, sitting by the hearth, weaving. Throw your arms around her knees and beg for mercy. If you win her favor, you will surely see your home again." This was a rather clever piece of social engineering for a princess, wasn't it? Avoiding scandal while ensuring the supplicant got the help he needed. It also highlights the matriarchal power structure within Phaeacian royalty, where the queen's influence was paramount. Odysseus nodded, understanding her delicate position. He followed her instructions perfectly. Cart set off, and Odysseus followed at a discreet distance, marveling at the fertile land, the well-built roads, the prosperous fields. As they approached the city, Athena wrapped him in a thick, protective mist, making him invisible to the Phaeacian townspeople. This was partly to protect him from curious stares, but also, as we'll see, to ensure he reached the queen directly. You walk with him, unseen, through the bustling city of Scheria. It is truly remarkable. The Phaeacians are a unique people, descendants of Poseidon, a rather ironic twist, considering his recent attempts to drown Odysseus. They live a life of idyllic peace, isolated from other mortals, famed for their swift ships, their love of feasting, music, and beautiful craftsmanship. They are like an ancient Greek version of a luxury cruise line, perpetually on vacation, but with the ability to build incredibly fast ships. But their harbor is a marvel, twin ports guarded by bronze gates, lined with their sleek, black ships. Reached the palace, a magnificent structure glittering with bronze, gold, and silver. There were bronze walls, a golden door, and even dogs of gold and silver guarding the entrance, fashioned by Hephaestus himself. You're talking serious bling. It was a palace of unimaginable wealth and beauty. Odysseus stepped inside, still cloaked in Athena's mist. It was a scene of unparalleled luxury and contentment, a stark contrast to the grime and despair he'd just left. He moved swiftly through the throng, unnoticed, until he reached Queen Arete. He threw himself at her knees, a traditional gesture of supplication, and the mist around him dissipated. The assembled nobles gasped, startled by the sudden appearance of this weary, unknown man. Silence fell over the hall. "Arete," Odysseus implored, his voice humble but firm. "I come to you as a supplicant, a shipwrecked man. Grant me passage to my homeland, for I have suffered much, and I long for home." King Alcinous, a wise and hospitable ruler, was quick to react. He helped Odysseus to his feet, offered him a seat of honor, and ordered wine poured. They welcomed him, not knowing his name, but recognizing his nobility and his obvious suffering. It was Xenia, in its purest form, the sacred bond of hospitality, put to its ultimate test. They feasted, and Alcinous promised Odysseus' passage home the next day. He promised a ship, a crew, anything he needed. He was so taken with Odysseus, in fact, that he even hinted at a marriage to Nausicaa. offering him a permanent place in their idyllic kingdom. Odysseus, ever polite, deferred the topic. The next day, Alcinous gathered his council and prepared a ship for Odysseus. He then arranged for a grand feast and, importantly, a series of athletic games and contests in honor of their mysterious guest. The Phaeacians were proud of their prowess in all forms of sport, second only to their skill in sailing. It was their way of showing off, of celebrating life. You watch as the games began. The young Phaeacian men, strong and agile, compete in boxing, wrestling, running, and discus throwing. Odysseus, still weary from his ordeal, observes quietly, respectful, but detached. He's seen too much real fighting to be impressed by mere sport. Then, one of the young Phaeacian princes, a boastful fellow named Euryalus, unable to bear Odysseus' silence, began to taunt him. "Stranger," he sneered, "you seem skilled in no sport. Perhaps you were a merchant, more concerned with profit than with athletic prowess. Oh, Euryalus, you just poked the wrong, very tired bear." Odysseus' face darkened. He rose, his eyes blazing, and without a word, he picked up the largest discus, far heavier than any the Phaeacians had thrown. The clang of it hitting the ground echoed through the field, a resounding statement. The Phaeacians, including Euryalus, were stunned into silence. It was a powerful reminder that even after years of hardship, the hero still possessed formidable strength and an unyielding spirit. Back at the palace, the feasting resumed. Alcinous, seeking to soothe any lingering resentment, called for the blind bard Demodocus to sing. Demodocus, master of his craft, began to sing of the Trojan War, of the heroic deeds of the Greeks, and specifically of the Trojan horse. As the bard's lyrical voice filled the hall, describing the cunning stratagem, the heroes hidden within the wooden horse, a profound sorrow settled over Odysseus. He had been the mastermind. He had lived through every brutal moment. He had seen so much death, caused so much destruction, and suffered so much loss since that fateful horse. "Our guest is clearly moved by this tale," he said, his voice kind. "Enough of songs of war. Now, let us feast. And then, stranger, tell us your name and where you come from, and what sufferings you have endured, for we are eager to send you home." The entire hall fell silent. All eyes turned to Odysseus. This was the moment, the long-awaited opportunity. He looked at their expectant faces, the faces of his final hope for home. He took a deep breath, prepared to recount the harrowing, unbelievable, monster-filled, God-cursed, decade-long tale of his wanderings. He was about to begin his own story, the one you've been so patiently listening to, bits and pieces of. The Odyssey, in his own words. The entire hall fell silent. All eyes turned to Odysseus. This was the moment. The long-awaited opportunity. He looked at their expectant faces, the faces of his final hope for home. He took a deep breath, prepared to recount the harrowing, unbelievable, monster-filled, God-cursed, decade-long tale of his wanderings. The Odyssey, in his own words. "I am Odysseus, son of Laertes," he began, his voice resonating through the silent hall. "Around it lie many islands closely set, all facing east and west, but Ithaca itself lies lowermost of all, farthest to sea, towards the dusk. A rugged land, but a good nurse of men." He paused, a flicker of profound longing in his eyes. You'd heard him describe it before, of course, but hearing it from him, the man who had suffered so much to return, added a fresh pang of understanding. He then launched into his epic narrative, painting vivid pictures with his words. He told them of the Chicanes, the initial disastrous raid, the arrogance of his men, and the swift, brutal counterattack that cost him so many lives. You knew the story, but hearing it from his lips, the raw regret in his voice made you feel the sting of those early losses anew. The Phaeacians, known for their peace, probably blinked at this casual mention of plunder and slaughter. He recounted the terrifying storm sent by Poseidon, the one that hurled them far off course for 9 days and 9 nights. You could almost feel the phantom spray on your face as he described clinging desperately to the rigging. The terror of being utterly lost. You could see the Phaeacian sailors, their faces grim, nodding in understanding of the sea's unpredictable fury. Then came the languid, almost seductive, tale of the lotus eaters. He described the sweet, cloying scent, the dangerous apathy, the struggle to drag his forgetful men back to the ships, binding them lest they succumb to blissful oblivion. He didn't mention your presence, of course, but you felt the familiar urge to just let go, to sink into that soft, sweet haze of forgetting. The Phaeacians, who lived a life of ease, perhaps understood the subtle danger of comfort a little too well. He paused for a drink, and the entire hall leaned forward, captivated. Then he moved on to the horrifying, stomach-churning encounter with Polyphemus, the Cyclops. He described the crude cave, the misplaced hope for hospitality, the monster's casual cannibalism, the sickening crunch of bone. You already knew the details, had already felt the primal fear, but hearing him relive the screams, the desperation, made the hairs on your arms stand up all over again. He recounted the blinding, the no-man trick, the terrifying escape beneath the rams, and then the fatal taunt, the arrogant shout that led to Poseidon's earth-shaking curse. You watched the Phaeacian faces, their eyes wide, some turning pale at the sheer barbarity. You could almost hear a collective shudder as he spoke of the mountain being hurled. Hey, he spoke of Ilus, the benevolent keeper of the winds, and the gift of the bag, so close to home. Then, the heartbreaking betrayal by his men, their greed, their suspicion, the immediate, explosive fury of the unleashed winds, snatching them from the very site of Ithaca. He described the humiliation of returning to Aelia, the chilling rejection by Elise, who now saw him as truly cursed. You remembered the feeling of that hope, so close, then snatched away. The Phaeacian king, Alcinous, looked particularly sympathetic at this point, perhaps recognizing a fellow ruler's burden. The story grew darker still, with the utterly devastating tale of the Lastrygonians. He painted a terrifying picture of the narrow harbor, the monstrous giants, the hail of boulders, the instant annihilation of 11 ships, the screams, the slaughter, the men speared like fish. This was the moment where almost everyone perished, where hope truly seemed to die. You could feel the Phaeacians' collective gasp, their comfortable world suddenly seeming very fragile indeed. This wasn't just a loss, it was a massacre on a scale they could barely comprehend. Then he described the deceptive beauty of Circe's island, the singing, the tame beasts, and the shocking transformation of his men into pigs. He told of Hermes' intervention, the magical mole, his own confrontation with the sorceress, the oath, and finally, the restoration of his men, made even younger and more handsome. He spoke of the year of luxurious forgetfulness, and then the nagging pull of home, voiced by the ever-cautious Eurylochus. The Phaeacian women probably exchanged knowing glances about the dangers of beautiful sorceresses, the descent into Hades. He spoke of the gloom, the chill, the trench, the blood that drew the shades. He recounted Elpenor's mournful plea, the profound wisdom of Tiresias' prophecy, the loss of comrades, the trouble at home, the journey with the oar. He spoke of the heart-wrenching sight of his mother, Anticlea, and its desperate, futile attempts to embrace her. He moved through the illustrious parade of heroines, briefly mentioning their fates. Then, the grim warnings from Agamemnon, the bitter wisdom of Achilles, the silent, unforgiving wrath of Ajax. He described the eternal torments of Tantalus, Sisyphus, and Tatuus, a chilling testament to divine wrath. He conveyed the overwhelming terror of the underworld, the desperate flight back to the land of the living. The Phaeacians listened with a mixture of awe and horror, some probably feeling a cold sweat trickle down their backs at the thought of such a journey. He then detailed Circe's final warnings, the irresistible song of the sirens, his own binding to the mast, the horrifying choice between Scylla and Charybdis. He described the agonizing moment. Scylla snatched 6 of his men, a raw, still painful memory that brought fresh tears to his eyes. Even after all this time, you could almost feel the phantom hands tearing at you. Finally, he came to the sacred cattle of Helios on Thrinacia, the solemn oath, the month-long storm, the gnawing hunger, his fateful sleep, and Eurymachus's desperate persuasion. He described the ominous omens, the crawling hides, the mooing meat hand, the subsequent cataclysmic wrath of Zeus, the lightning bolt, the total annihilation of his last ship, the final absolute loss of all his men. He spoke of clinging to the keel and mast, of drifting back to Scylla and Charybdis, of the terrifying leap to the fig tree, of his last solitary struggle against the sea. You felt the exhaustion just listening to him. The Aeacians were silent, utterly gripped by the raw emotion of his survival against impossible odds. He ended with the 7 years of gilded imprisonment on Ogygia, Calypso's island, his endless weeping, his longing for home, despite the offer of immortality. He spoke of Athena's pity, Zeus's decree, Hermes' visit, Calypso's bitter release, and the building of his final, fragile raft. The key recounted Poseidon's last, furious storm, the destruction of the raft, Ino's divine veil, and his desperate key. Today, swim to Scheria, his miraculous washing ashore, and his collapse into exhaustion. He brought them right up to the moment of his awakening by Nausicaa and her maids, his appearance, his carefully worded plea, her kindness, and his subsequent arrival at their very palace. He finished his tale. The vast hall, usually alive with chatter and music, remained utterly silent. The Phaeacian nobles were spellbound, their faces a canvas of awe, pity, and profound respect. The sheer scale of his suffering, the impossible survival, the tenacity of his spirit, had left them breathless. This wasn't just a story, it was a testament to the brutal, beautiful, unpredictable nature of the cosmos. King Alcinous, ever the gracious host, was the first to speak, breaking the profound silence. "Odysseus," he said, his voice filled with admiration, "you have told us a tale of sorrow and suffering, such as no man has ever endured. You have come to us from the ends of the earth, and you will not be denied your homecoming. We will prepare the finest ship, manned by our best sailors, and they will convey you swiftly to Ithaca and place you there, asleep, with all your treasures beside you. We are renowned for our ships, which require no steersman and fear no storm. They know the minds of men in the cities of the world." And they meant it. The Phaeacians, beloved of the gods, possessed ships that were truly miraculous. They had no rudders, no need for sails in a calm, but were guided by thought, by the will of their captains, swift as a bird's flight, shrouded in mist, capable of crossing vast distances in the blink of an eye. They were essentially ancient Greek stealth speedboats, powered by pure Phaeacian thought waves and divine blessing. Scholars still argue if these ships were truly magical, or just highly advanced seafaring technology beyond the comprehension of ordinary mortals. Either way, they were going to get Odysseus home. The next day was a whirl of preparations. Alcinous ordered a final, lavish feast in Odysseus's honor. The entire court gathered, and more gifts were brought forth: cloaks, tunics, gold, tripods, cauldrons, so many that Odysseus's wealth would rival what he had lost in Troy. Nausicaa, beautiful and kind, stood by the door as he departed, offering a final, shy farewell. "Remember me, stranger," she said softly, "for to me you owe your life." Odysseus promised he would, silently acknowledging the young princess, who had been his first ray of hope on Scheria. As night fell, the Phaeacian sailors, sturdy and skilled, led Odysseus to the ship. He carried the heavy gifts himself, ensuring they were safely stowed. He boarded, weary but filled with a profound, almost unbelievable hope. This was it, the very last leg. He stretched out on a soft bed of rugs and linens prepared for him on the deck, surrounded by his treasures. The sailors cast off the stern cables, and with a rhythmic cheer, the ship moved swiftly into the open sea. Odysseus closed his eyes, his mind finally at peace. He felt the ship surge forward, effortlessly slicing through the waves, faster than any hawk in flight. The silence was profound, broken only by the whisper of the water as the ship sped onward, shrouded in a divine mist. He finally, truly, allowed himself to fall into a deep, dreamless sleep, the first real, untroubled rest he had known in 20 long, agonizing years. The ship flew across the wind-dark sea. It was a journey of mere hours. As dawn began to break, painting the eastern sky in soft hues of rose and gold, the ship reached the shores of Ithaca. Its very air changed, familiar and sweet, the scent of wild thyme, of ancient olive trees, of home. The Phaeacian sailors, without waking Odysseus, gently lifted him from his bed, still deep in slumber, and carried him ashore. They laid him carefully on the sand, beneath a spreading olive tree, surrounded by its piles of glittering gifts, the gold, the bronzes, the woven cloths, all testimony to his wealth and the Phaeacians' generosity. Then they turned their magical ship around, and with a silent prayer, sped back towards Scheria, their mission complete. Poseidon, still simmering with rage over his blinded son, watched the Phaeacian ship returning. Father Zeus, he grumbled on Olympus, these Phaeacians are too bold, too proud of their unfailing ships. They convey all men safely home. I will teach them a lesson. When they reach their harbor, Zeus advised, turn their ship into stone. Let it sink, a warning to all. As the Phaeacian ship neared its home port, the jubilant sailors rowing into the harbor, a sudden, horrifying transformation occurred. With a mighty crash, the ship turned to stone, rooted to the seabed, becoming a jagged rock at the mouth of the harbor, a perpetual monument to Poseidon's wrath. Toned, understood the divine message, atoned. From that day on, they ceased their tradition of conveying strangers across the sea. A harsh lesson learned by a peaceful people. Back on Ithaca, Odysseus awoke. He blinked, disoriented. The island was shrouded in a thick mist, magically conjured by Athena. He didn't recognize his own home. He looked at the familiar features, the mountains, the trees, and felt a pang of despair. Had the Phaeacians tricked him? Had they dropped him on a random, unknown shore? Had he suffered all this only to be lost again, so close to his goal? The irony was just too much. Just then, a young shepherd boy appeared. He was slender, with long hair, and seemed oddly familiar. This, of course, was Athena in disguise, ever the subtle, theatrical guide. "Who are you, stranger?" she asked, her voice light. "In what land is this?" Odysseus, ever cautious and still wary of deception, spun a quick, elaborate, and completely fabricated tale. He claimed he was a Cretan, a fugitive who had killed a man, seeking refuge. He even invented a lineage and a purpose. It's a classic Odysseus move. When in doubt, lie. And then lie some more. His capacity for impromptu fiction was truly impressive. Athena smiled, then transformed herself back into her true, radiant form, tall and beautiful, her eyes blazing with divine light. "It is you, Odysseus," she laughed, "always cunning, always spinning tales. Even here, on your own land, you cannot help but deceive." Odysseus, overwhelmed, sank to his knees. "Goddess," he cried, "I scarcely knew you. Why did you not appear to me earlier, throughout my long sufferings?" Athena explained her reasons. "I could not openly defy my uncle Poseidon," she said gently, "but I have been with you, guiding you, and now we have much to do. Your house is filled with insolent men, feasting on your wealth, pressing your wife to marry one of them. You must deal with them." Odysseus' face darkened. This was the trouble in his house. Tiresias had prophesied. The thought of those contemptuous suitors, devouring his livelihood, polluting his home, filled him with a cold, righteous fury. "Tell me," he demanded, "how can I face so many? They are 100 strong, and I am alone." With no ships, no men to aid me, Athena assured him. Do not fear, I will be with you. I will aid you in battle, and we will devise a plan. But first, you must disguise yourself. With a touch of her golden wand, she transformed him. His skin became wrinkled, his hair vanished, replaced by a few scraggly gray tufts. His clothes became tattered rags, his eyes dimmed, and his strong limbs shriveled into those of a frail old beggar. Even the two clever scholars in ancient Greece would have struggled to recognize him. He was truly a man of many turns, even in appearance. Go now, Athena instructed, to the swineherd, Eumaeus. He is your loyal servant, and he has remained faithful. You will find him among your herds, tending to the swine. Stay with him, learn what you can, and wait for a sign from me. Atis vanished, leaving Odysseus alone, a beggar on his own land, ready to begin the final, most dangerous phase of his homecoming. He walked the familiar paths, now strange in its disguise, his heart a mixture of fury and cautious hope. He was a king in rags, a warrior looking like a pauper, walking towards the hut of his loyal swineherd. Meanwhile, his son, Telemachus, was also on a journey. Unknown to Odysseus, Athena, in her infinite wisdom, had sent Telemachus on his own quest, a trial by fire, to search for news of his father. It sailed to Pylos to consult with wise old Nestor, and then on to Sparta to visit King Menelaus and Queen Helen. Yes, that Helen back home and seemingly forgiven after causing a decade-long war. Ancient Greek drama had a flair for complicated reconciliations. In Sparta, Telemachus had been welcomed with lavish hospitality, learning much about his father's fame and suffering from Menelaus himself. He had grown in confidence, learning the ways of diplomacy and command. Now, Athena appeared to Telemachus in a dream, urging him to return home swiftly, warning him of a suitor ambush. She was carefully orchestrating the timing of father and son's reunion. Back on Ithaca, Odysseus reached the lonely hut of Eumaeus. He found the swineherd busy at work, a loyal, honest man who had managed Odysseus's extensive herds throughout his long absence, never wavering in his devotion. Eumaeus, seeing only a wretched old beggar, nonetheless offered him the sacred hospitality of Xenia. He invited Odysseus in, gave him food and drink, and shared his meager bed, speaking mournfully of his lost master, Odysseus, whom he believed to be dead. It was a profound test of loyalty, and Eumaeus passed with flying colors. Odysseus, listening to Eumaeus's heartfelt sorrow, felt a surge of warmth and gratitude. This was a man he could trust. For a time, Odysseus stayed with Eumaeus, listening to the gossip of the island, learning of the insolence of the suitors, the faithfulness of Penelope, the growing despair of Telemachus. He learned how his palace was being plundered, his livestock consumed, his servants treated with contempt. The rage in his heart grew cold and steady. Then, the moment Athena had orchestrated finally arrived. Telemachus' ship, having narrowly escaped a suitor ambush, landed on Ithaca. Athena appeared to Odysseus in Eumaeus' hut, telling him it was time for the reunion. She touched him again with her wand, restoring him to his true form, the strong, noble king. Telemachus entered the hut, seeking out the loyal swineherd. Eumaeus greeted him with tears of joy, like a father welcoming a long-lost son. Telemachus, seeing the strange old man in the corner, paid him little mind, assuming him to be just another unfortunate beggar. But then, Athena, unseen by Telemachus, nodded to Odysseus. Odysseus stepped forward, and with another touch of Athena's wand, he transformed back into his radiant, heroic self. Telemachus stared, dumbfounded, at the sudden appearance of this godlike stranger. "No, Telemachus," Odysseus said, his voice deep with emotion. "I am your father, for whose sake you suffer much and bear the violence of men." Telemachus, disbelieving, thought it was a god or some trick. "You are not my father," he cried. "No mortal man could change like this," Odysseus explained Athena's aid. "The magic of the gods. And then the truth sank in. Father and son, separated for 2 decades, embraced, weeping uncontrollably, their tears mingling in a moment of profound, heart-wrenching reunion. Even Eumaeus, loyal to the core, was overcome with emotion. It was a beautiful, raw moment, earned through years of separation and suffering. Once their emotions had settled, the strategy began. Odysseus, the master planner, laid out their next steps. Telemachus would return to the palace, ostensibly as usual. Odysseus, once again disguised as an old beggar by Athena, would follow later, entering his own home as a lowly supplicant. "You must recognize me," Odysseus instructed his son. "No matter what indignities I suffer, you must not reveal my identity, no matter how the suitors mock me or even strike me. We are outnumbered, and cunning is our only weapon. Move all the weapons from the hall, leaving only a few for us, and trust in Athena's guidance." It was a bold, risky plan, relying on Telemachus' self-control and Odysseus' ability to endure humiliation in his own house. The stage was set. The returning king, stripped of his glory, would walk into his own home as a beggar, testing the loyalty of his household, assessing the villains who had usurped his place. The great battle for Ithaca, a war of wits and blades against a host of arrogant, well-fed suitors, was about to begin. And you, dear sleepy listener, are about to enter that palace with him, unseen, to witness the final bloody showdown. And you, dear sleepy listener, are about to enter that palace with him, unseen, to witness the final bloody showdown. Odysseus, a king in rags, a warrior in tatters, set out for his own palace. The sun was rising, painting the familiar landscape of Ithaca in hues of gold and rose, a beauty he had yearned for, but could not yet truly embrace. His heart beat with a strange mix of dread and anticipation, a burning fury simmering beneath his beggar's disguise. He passed loyal servants, old faces who looked through him, seeing only a pauper, not their master. As he approached the palace gates, a movement caught his eye. An old, emaciated hound, covered in fleas, barely clinging to life. It was Argus, Odysseus' own hunting dog, whom he had trained as a puppy 20 long years ago. Though ancient and feeble, recognized his master's voice, the cadence of his step, the unique scent of him, even through the rags and the magic. Argus pricked his ears, wagged his tail weakly, trying with his last breath to raise his head. A single tear rolled down Odysseus' cheek, a pang of deep, raw grief that he could not openly acknowledge. He dared not show emotion, dared not reveal himself, not yet. He simply looked at his loyal companion, his heart breaking, and walked on. As Odysseus entered the palace, Argus, having fulfilled his final duty, having seen his master one last time, closed his eyes and died. Quiet, heartbreaking end for a loyal, old friend, a poignant marker of the passage of time and the toll of absence. Scholars still debate whether this scene is a testament to animal loyalty or a powerful symbol of Ithaca's degradation under the suitors, a land and a home neglected. You follow Odysseus into the great hall. It's a scene of opulent chaos. Hundreds of suitors, arrogant, insolent noblemen from Ithaca and neighboring islands, sprawled on the couches, devouring Odysseus' livestock, drinking his wine, treating his home like their own personal banquet hall. They were rude, loud, and utterly without shame. Penelope, his faithful wife, remained secluded upstairs, weaving her endless shroud for Laertes, a clever ruse to delay their insistent demands for marriage. Telemachus, pale but resolute, sat among them, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity, but largely ignored. Odysseus, looking like any other wretched beggar, walked among them, his presence met with jeers and insults. The suitors, in their drunken arrogance, mocked him, threw bones at him. Some even struck him. Odysseus, his face impassive, endured it all, a silent king, suffering humiliation in his own house. His rage was a cold, controlled fire, fueling his every deliberate step. He noted every insult, every act of disrespect, storing it away for the coming reckoning. The worst of them was Antinous, the most arrogant and abusive of the suitors, the ringleader. He refused Odysseus even a scrap of food, casting insults and even hurling a footstool at him, which struck Odysseus on the shoulder. Odysseus, a veteran of countless blows, didn't flinch, simply thought, "Poor wretch, you will die before your wedding day." A truly chilling prediction, given the circumstances. Even Eurymachus, another leading suitor, added his share of scorn. Penelope, hearing of the beggar's treatment, sent for him, was curious, hoping the stranger might have news of her husband. Odysseus, still disguised, went to her. He spoke to her, cautiously, offering vague, but hopeful tales of Odysseus, trying not to reveal too much, not to give away his hand. Penelope, ever cautious, ever sharp, felt a strange connection to this ragged stranger, a flicker of hope that she dared not fully believe. She told him of her sorrows, of the suitor's persistence, of her cunning ruse with the shroud, unraveling by night what she wove by day. Odysseus listened, his heart aching for her suffering, his admiration for her loyalty growing. Later, in the hall, he endured more indignities, even engaging in a brutal boxing match with another beggar, Eris, a lazy, gluttonous fellow. Odysseus, still disguised, easily defeated him, showcasing a hidden strength that unnerved the suitors. The tension in the palace grew unbearable. Penelope, desperate for a resolution, finally declared that she would marry the suitor who could string Odysseus' great bow and shoot an arrow through the holes of 12 axe heads lined up in a row. This was the test, a challenge only Odysseus himself had ever accomplished. It was her clever way of buying more time, for she believed no other man could perform the feat. She probably didn't actually want any of them to succeed. It was a delaying tactic, a Hail Mary pass. They strained, they sweated, they cursed, but they could not even string the massive bow. It was too stiff, too heavy, meant only for Odysseus' mighty hands. Laughter and frustration filled the hall. Odysseus, still in his beggar's rags, approached Telemachus, Eumaeus, the swineherd, and Philoetius, the cowherd, his two most loyal servants. He revealed his true identity to them, showing them an old scar on his foot, the one he'd gotten as a boy while boar hunting. Their tears of disbelief and joy were swift and silent. These were the only loyal men he had. As the suitors continued to fail, Odysseus, the beggar, made a humble request. "Let me try," he said, his voice surprisingly firm. The suitors roared with laughter, mocking him, fearing that even a beggar might shame them. Antinous, predictably, was the loudest in his scorn, but Telemachus, remembering his father's instructions, firmly asserted his authority, sending Penelope to her chamber. "This is a man's affair," he declared, a new confidence in his voice. With all eyes on him, Odysseus took his own bow. He inspected it, feeling the familiar grip, testing the wood. With effortless grace, he strung it. The bow twanked, a high, clear sound, like the cry of a swallow. It was a familiar sound to some, a chilling omen to others. He then took an arrow, knocked it, drew the string, and released. The arrow flew true, through all 12 axe heads, without touching a single one. It landed squarely in the far wall. Silence, a stunned, absolute silence, fell over the hall. The suitors stared, their faces pale, their drunken bravado evaporating like mist. Odysseus, still holding the bow, turned to Telemachus. "Telemachus," he said, his voice now ringing with authority, "your guest has not shamed you. Now, let us feast. There is another target." Odysseus, with a terrifying roar, ripped off his beggar's rags, revealing his muscular, powerful form beneath. He took another arrow, aimed it at Antinous, who was raising a cup to his lips, and shot him through the throat. Antinous fell, choking on his own blood, his wine spilling across the table. The first, the worst, had fallen. Chaos erupted. The suitors screamed, thinking it was an accident, an enraged beggar. They looked for weapons, but Telemachus, under his father's instructions, had removed them all from the walls. Okay, defenseless, trapped like rats, dogs, Odysseus bellowed, his voice filled with righteous fury. You thought I would never return. You have plundered my house, forced yourselves on my maidservants, tried to marry my wife while I was still alive. Eurymachus, trying to appeal, promised restitution, gold, anything. But Odysseus was unyielding. The arrows flew, swift and deadly, from Odysseus's bow, felling suitors, one by one. Callimachus, Eumaeus, and Philaudeus, now armed, fought fiercely by his side. It was a desperate, brutal melee. The hall became a slaughterhouse, slippery with blood and littered with corpses. Some suitors, in desperation, tried to rush Odysseus, but he met them with savage efficiency, his sword flashing. He was a storm of vengeance, a god of war unleashed. At one point, the suitor Agelaus tried to rally the remaining men. But Athena, unseen by all but Odysseus, appeared at the entrance of the hall, holding her aegis, the fearsome shield with the Gorgon's head. The sight of it, though unseen by most, caused a wave of unreasoning panic and terror to sweep through the suitors. They collapsed, whimpering, their courage utterly broken. Athena's presence made it clear. Divine favor was on Odysseus' side. The massacre continued until every single suitor lay dead. The hall was silent once more, save for the heavy breathing of the victorious few, and the grotesque sounds of blood dripping onto the floor. It was a terrible, necessary act of purification, cleansing his home of the corruption that had festered there for 20 years. Odysseus then ordered Euryclea, his old nurse, to identify the disloyal maidservants, those who had consorted with the suitors. 12 maids were found guilty. Odysseus, in his raw, ancient justice, ordered Telemachus and the loyal servants to put them to death. They were hung, a grim, brutal end, a stark reminder of the harsh realities of the ancient world and the consequences of disloyalty in a household. After this, the hall was cleansed with fire and sulfur, purifying the space of the stench of death and the taint of corruption.